The Meditation by Jacobo Grinberg, Zilberbaum, 1991. Preliminary Note by Bending Realities. Written in 1991 by renowned Mexican psychologist and neurophysiologist Jacobo Grinberg, meditation explores the practice as an essential tool for self-discovery and personal transformation. In a time of stress and disconnection, this book invites readers to rediscover inner calm and delve into the depths of human consciousness. Jacobo Grinberg, celebrated for blending science and spirituality, devoted his life to studying the mind and perception. Drawing inspiration from the indigenous traditions of Mexico, his mysterious disappearance in 1994 adds an enigmatic aura to his legacy, which continues to influence those interested in the intersection of science and spirituality. The book stands out for its clarity and depth, making complex concepts accessible to all kinds of readers. Thanks to the meticulous English translation by the Bending Realities team, meditation now reaches new international audiences while preserving Grinberg's original essence. In a world increasingly in need of introspection, this work stands as an invaluable guide to exploring the mind and finding balance in everyday life. Introduction. Just as it is possible to define stages of individual growth, such as childhood, puberty, adolescence, adult organic maturity, and old age, so too societies and humanity as a whole undergo developmental processes. These are determined by global trends that affect, to a greater or lesser degree, all individuals. Whether we like it or not, we are part of a macroorganism that affects us and which we also affect. Every organic unit, regardless of its level, is governed by similar laws, and what could be called planetary consciousness does not escape these laws of organized systems. Our individual organic body and brain are an excellent model that manifests the operation of these laws. We are made up of an almost astronomical number of cells organized into tissues, organs, and systems. Each cell of our body is a unit that elaborates and processes its food, discards it, and fulfills a function in these egocentric structures of comfort, as Alberto Guevara Rojas called the cells of our body. But at the same time, each cell contains a model of information about the whole, and is influenced by the organic unit of which it is a part. This situation, in which each element of a totality possesses a certain degree of independence, but simultaneously of dependence with respect to the unit of which it forms part, and, on the other hand, exercises a specific function that contains at the same time information of the whole, is observed in every organization. The same situation prevails in the human brain. Each neuron contains the information of the whole brain and depends, in order to function, on the integrity of the brain, but simultaneously possesses a certain independence with respect to the whole and performs specific functions. Contemporary physics, in one of its chapters, Holographic Optics, has developed a model, the holographic, based on the above considerations. A hologram is a three-dimensional photograph in which each of its parts contains information about the whole. According to the holographic model, the whole universe is a hologram because in space, also each of its points concentrates information about the totality. The global organism that we could call humanity, living on the surface of a planet immersed in space, constitutes, from a global perspective, a single living and active organic body. The same holographic laws of organization are manifested in this organism. For an organism to be catalogued as such, interactions between all its elements are required. We know, from the latest psychophysiological discoveries, that the human brain maintains a constant energetic exchange with the rest of the brains through the creation and expansion of neural fields. We also know that these fields create a kind of network of interactions sustained by the structure of space. This vibrant, living and dynamic network constitutes the most refined level of the noosphere, and the whole brain activity of the human species is inscribed in it. Psychophysiology calls this network hyperfield and could be defined as the structural energetic substrate of the planetary consciousness. Each human being receives influences from the hyperfield that nourish his individual consciousness, and in turn, each individual brain affects the hyperfield by modifying its structure. Each human being, in turn, contains all the information of the hyperfield and depends on it, but simultaneously, each of us possesses a certain degree of independence and exercises a specific function within the great web of events. Thus, the planetary consciousness, its energetic structure, the hyperfield, and its organic body, the planet Earth, form a unified body that develops and courses its life through different stages, just like each of its elements. Kabbalah says that the true mystery is unity. For a cell of our body, the influences it receives come from a mysterious, inaccessible, and transcendent unity. For the individual consciousness that is situated at the tip of the iceberg of its bodily unity, the influences it receives from the hyperfield also constitute a mystery. Some human beings have not even been able to know the mysteries of their own body. They act as if their consciousness were located in one of their cellular strata and not in their bodily unit. Therefore, their mind is dominated by the mystery of this unity. Others have gone up a step and seem to be more in control of themselves. They know their body and are no longer dominated by it. Another class of individuals who have transcended the mystery of their bodily unity and begin to have glimpses of the hyperfield and planetary consciousness perceive some of its flows and dynamics. Among us, however, almost no one has been able to reach the hyperfield unity and, therefore, the planetary consciousness. Each step of expansive development, when genuine, nourishes the individual consciousness with a kind of joy, since the expansion of consciousness, when it occurs, connects the individual with the same energy that has activated the evolution of the complex units from the simple elements. We possess an organic body made up of thousands of billions of organized and interacting elements. In order to arrive at this miraculous portent of corporeal unity, from the beginning of time there had to be a tendency towards unification. Thus, an electron united with a proton giving rise to the first atom, hydrogen. This relatively simple unit unified with other units of the same level to produce a more complex whole, helium. In turn, helium underwent a similar process, and little by little, more complex units were created, with a greater number of organized elements. Carbon appeared, and then the cell, the tissue, and the organ, formidable products of the universal tendency toward unification, centrality, and complexity, as Teilhard de Chardin, the first thinker who was able to realize the direction of evolutionary energy, called them. I was saying before that each step that the individual consciousness takes on the path of its expansion towards unity fills with joy. This joy is the access to the mystery of unification. If a cell of our body were able to have access to our individual consciousness, it would glow illuminated by its unity, with the totality of which it is a part. In the same way, a human being who succeeds in attaining unity with the hyperfield and with the planetary consciousness is filled with joy at achieving the unity of his individual consciousness with the totality to which he belongs. We call this access of an element to the totality of the organism of which it is a part the expansion of consciousness. This paper is intended as a practical manual to achieve this expansion of the consciousness. In it, I will try to describe a series of techniques whose practice allows such expansion. These techniques are true instruments for the development of the consciousness and are generically called meditation techniques. Before exposing these instruments, I would like to reflect on the state of planetary consciousness and meditation because, from a serious analysis of it, many ideas about the present purpose of meditation and its use will be derived. In other words, knowing the state of the planetary unit to which we belong, we will be able to exercise our right to influence it in a proper direction and collaborate with its evolution. In turn, this impulse will contribute to the development of an even more transcendent and expansive unity. This idea is not novel. The ancient Olmecs based their cosmovision and their organization as an empire on the knowledge of cosmic influences. Their leaders were great initiates who affirmed that the meaning of each man's life and the sense of an organized society was to create instruments, both individual and communal, to collaborate and favor the development of the cosmos as a whole. In this sense, when I affirm that the individual consciousness is part of a planetary consciousness, and that the energetic structure of the same is the hyperfield and its organic body, the planet Earth, I am not assuming that this unity is the last level to which we can have access. Beyond the hyperfield and the planetary consciousness, there are other layers of unification. Also, the appropriate instrument to have access to them is meditation. The stages of the development of planetary consciousness. Planet Earth is a living organism. Like the human body, it possesses different layers of organization that collaborate with each other to maintain a certain equilibrium. This equilibrium, however, is not static. Within its organization coexist more or less fixed structures and others capable of modifying themselves, and thus exploring new avenues and paths of global organization. The brain, as a model of organization, also has different levels, some more stable than others. For a brain to be preserved as such, it must possess a relatively stable structure that serves to maintain its unity and prevents a functional dispersion that could prove catastrophic. The structure that maintains brain unity is built by a dynamic framework of stable circuits. These have developed over millions of years and are common to every human being. We perceive visual images and experience them in similar ways, and in general, our perceptions do not differ much. Precisely because of this anatomical and structural similarity, in this way, a kind of basic inheritance is maintained. The model that the brain has used in this task is the structure of space itself. Space is the only thing that has remained constant throughout evolution. This structure is holographic, so that each of its points contains the information of the whole. Moreover, each point is interconnected by the totality. The spatial structure of the brain is a copy of the structure of space. Neural circuits allow networks capable of containing the totality of the brain's information and satisfying the condition of global interconnection to exist. This basic organization maintains an essential constancy, but allows a considerable degree of freedom for the exploration of novel channels of cooperation. There are brain functions that, sustained on this basal coherence, activate dissident operations that create local coherences. When these zones succeed in their encoding operations, they modify the basal coherence and determine a change in the unity of the brain field. In this sense, these local coherences are individual and, in principle, do not affect the whole brain. Abstract thinking, advances in philosophy, and the proposition of novel paradigms in science are examples of the product of this type of local coherence in the brain of some individual. Gradually, these novel developments influence the consciousness of other individuals, and, when a considerable number of these individuals share the same local operations, the very structure of the hyperfield, and therefore that of planetary consciousness, is altered. I think inwardly that contemporary psychophysiology will eventually discover the existence of direct influences between different brains, presumably based on the interaction between neural fields. This interconnection is what allows local coherence to modify basal coherence. A similar situation occurs for the living body of the planet. In it coexists a fixed structure that maintains a global cohesion and a basic unity. This structure is constituted by the organization of inorganic materials, soil and seas, mountains and geological strata. Above this is the biosphere, with a lesser degree of rigidity and greater capacity for change. In this layer of planetary life, there is also an ecological balance necessary for the subsistence of the whole system. Finally, the noosphere, an energetic structure of surprising flexibility, constitutes the layer of exploration of new channels of development. Its local coherence is capable of modifying the basal coherence of the whole system, either supporting its development or affecting it negatively. Planetary consciousness, and even the hyperfield itself, does not depend on the existence of only one of the above-mentioned layers or levels, but of all of them at the same time. Since the Gestalt theorists, we know that the whole is greater than the sum of its parts, and that an organized unity is a synergy with properties not located in the isolated elements that are part of it, but in their exchanges and organization. In this way, the human consciousness and the planetary consciousness depend on the physical and geological structure of the Earth, the biosphere, and all the atmospheric and cosmic influences that exist, as well as on the brain activity and the individual neural fields. In other words, the hyperfield contains all levels of the biological continuums, and at the same time is affected by them, although it constitutes the level closest to the conscious experience of the one who is in unity with it. It is not detached from all the influences that feed it, just as individual consciousness is not detached from bodily conditions. The stages of the development of planetary consciousness are, in general, 3. The first is associated with the physical and geological structure of the planet. The second appears with organic life in all its varieties and forms, giving birth to the biosphere. The third, finally, appears when brain activity develops and the noosphere is created. In the following sections, I will try to explore the noospheric layer and analyze, fundamentally, the product of human brain activity, without meaning that this last activity is detached from the others. The stages of human consciousness, according to Virginia Sanchez, a Mexican sociologist, it is likely that the first human beings to experience an expansion and development of consciousness were women. It was they who first had to learn about their own body's capacity to create other life, and who recognized the identity between their own organic cycles and those of nature. Their menstrual cycles bore some relationship to lunar cycles, the period of their pregnancies and the similarity of these functions to those of animals. Necessarily, they had to provoke in women the feeling of belonging to a global order. The relationship between coitus, pregnancy, and birth remained 3 separate events for men, who had no need to find any relationship between them. On the other hand, for the woman, from early on, the 3 events had to appear in her consciousness as linked by a causal order. The woman could not separate herself from her condition of being a generator of life, nor could she ignore her children as her own, because she saw them emerging from herself, from the interior of her own body. The maternal functions and the care of the progeny had to create in the feminine mind a consciousness of greater unity with the rest, and a greater knowledge of the body than in the case of man. Man remained a rootless being, while woman began to develop conditions of care, responsibility, and a sense of belonging to the earth and its creatures, cycles and conditions that made her superior in her capacity for social organization. At some point, the perception of the magic of creation and of the earth as a living being similar to it permeated the feminine consciousness and prompted a desire to share and support the terrestrial dynamics. Therefore, and according to Virginia Sanchez herself, the first human societies were matriarchal and the prevailing consciousness was feminine. Man, at the same time, activated a mobility and a sense of freedom with respect to the feminine restrictions of maternity, sedentary life and care of the progeny, which developed in him another type of consciousness more detached from everyday life and therefore more abstract. He, like the animals he hunted, was mobile, and his survival depended on his ability to win and his strategy to do so. Agriculture had to be invented by women, as did fixed settlements and forms of organization that would support stability. War and the need for conquest and power were male inventions. In some areas of the planet, men adapted to the feminine consciousness and accepted its values, its capacity to respect the environment, and its tendency to sacralize it, while in others, men lashed out against this government by asserting the strength of their masculine position. The matriarchal society, sedentary, organized, respectful of nature, careful with the environment and united to it, was conquered by the aggressive, mobile, active and warlike masculine vision. A period of patriarchal predominance was established on the planet that still lasts to this day. The results of the male vision, high technology, power, war, ecological destruction, and the subjugation of women and their discrimination, began to be questioned with the emergence of women's liberation movements. A considerable and growing number of our planet's inhabitants turn their gaze towards peace, the return and respect for ecology, love and tenderness, and above all, the need to cooperate and not to compete, to unify and not to separate. These would seem to be the result of the resurgence of the feminine consciousness and its protest against the destruction caused by the dominance of the masculine consciousness. At present, the planetary consciousness movement seems to be leaning towards achieving a unity of the two principles. New developments in frontier physics, the openness of almost all mystical currents, the need to sacralize everyday life, the repudiation of war and respect for nature, coupled with the need to use all technology for the same purposes, indicate a shift in the direction of unification. It would seem that we are living the end of one era and the beginning of another. The development and use of instruments that help the development and expansion of consciousness towards this unity is becoming more and more necessary and important. Meditation as an instrument for the expansion of consciousness meditation must have been a feminine invention. On the other hand, its systematization was not. All the references we know indicate that the great creators of religions and the main inventors of meditative knowledge and techniques were men. Patanjali, Buddha, Jesus, Lao Tse, Muhammad, Moses, the prophets, Milarepa, Shimon Bar Yochai, and more recently, Saint John of the Cross, Isaac Luria, Israel Baal Shem Tov, Ramakrishna, Yogananda, Vivekananda, Ramana Maharshi, Nisargadatta Maharaj, etc. Perhaps all of them managed to unify their masculine and feminine principles, and took advantage of their capacity for abstraction and their detachment from the concrete to explore their own consciousness, their relationships with God and the cosmos, giving rise to true feats in the creation of sublime systems of self-knowledge and expansion of consciousness. Regardless of the reason for this phenomenon, no one doubts that the human species possesses an extraordinary arsenal of techniques and knowledge that have ceased to be secret and used by a select few, and are now accessible to any human being. These tools are the true hope for the human race, because their use activates the contact of the individual consciousness with its sources and with the basic currents of unification responsible, as we saw before, for evolution and the emergence of the hyperfield. I will review these instruments in the hope that the instructions I describe will be sufficient for anyone reading this book to be able to use them. There is no better teacher than oneself, and my trust is placed in the reader, in the sense that he will be the best judge to decide which technique suits him best or is closer and more akin to his own individual nature. This does not mean that I repudiate the idea of having a living and present master, expert in the use of one or several techniques. To have such a guide is a privilege that should be taken advantage of when it presents itself, but its absence should not prevent personal and isolated exploration. Precisely, that is the motivation of this writing, to offer the opportunity to begin to know these instruments to those who have not been fortunate enough to have a teacher, and for whom the idea of having one is not attractive. I have only included the meditation techniques that I have explored and experienced in my own person, and have left aside those that I have not had the opportunity to experience in myself. It would be unethical to describe benefits that I have not experienced in myself, and so I have limited the discussion to the tools with which I am directly familiar. This is not to say that the techniques I have left aside are better or worse than those I describe. In reality, all the techniques are part of a single body, which is meditation, and their differences are variations that enrich the knowledge of oneness, but do not divide it. It is my greatest wish that this writing helps those who read it, cooperates in their legitimate search for peace and happiness, and in turn, contributes to the development of the hyperfield and the planetary consciousness. Preliminary exercises. Between reality and the experiential perception of it, there are many filters bequeathed by personal history and education. During life, we learn to consider as existent and objective an area of reality, and to discard many others. Our perception is limited and, sooner or later, fixed. We see the world and its events as separated by a more or less opaque screen, without realizing that it stands between us and reality. Rather, we confuse the screen with reality. We cannot observe that screen because it is precisely through it that what we see is formed. That screen is the personal myth or identity theme that we have internalized. The degree of transparency of the screen depends on our previous conditioning and our past. Emotionally charged memories are inscribed on it, and when something from reality activates them, we react by projecting our own conflicts, traumas, and distortions outwards. Since we always see through the same filter and are unaware of its existence, reality, which in itself is luminous, fresh, self-refreshing, and always new, appears to us as repetitive, dull, gray, painful, and dark. But not only the outside is tinged depending on the coloring of the screen, but also the sense of personal identity. Our inner self, what we think we are, is separated from what we really are by the same screen and identical filters through which we see the outside. The filters of perception are not only associated with our mental and cerebral functioning, but are located above all, embedded in our body. Traumatic memories and unprocessed incidents are inscribed in different areas of the surface of our body, in our internal organs, our musculature, and all the systems that are part of the body structure. Our main filter is the body itself, since we identify with it, and, through it, the experience of who we are is created. During the meditative processes, we become more sensitive to everything that happens both outside and inside ourselves, and we become aware of the close relationships that exist between the two realms of reality. In advanced stages, the apparent difference between the outer and the inner begins to break down, until, in enlightenment, the inner and the outer are perceived as a simple and complete unity. What we truly are comes to the surface, and we get in touch with our real nature, which is the same for everyone and everything. We remain individuals, but at the same time we live in union with the same source which is at the basis and foundation of all manifestation. For enlightenment to be possible, the body must be purified and its filters of reality clarified until they become transparent. For this reason, before entering into the practices of meditation proper, we will review some preparatory exercises whose purpose is to perform a deep bodily cleansing. Unblocking of joints. This is a technique whose origin is Taoist, and its use is widely recommended by Chinese medicine. The technique consists of performing a complete body path, decreasing the stiffness of joint movements, and in general, loosening the body muscles from the eyes to the heels and feet. To initiate the unblocking of joints, the subject first stands up, closes his eyes, and concentrates on the here and now, feeling his whole body. When he achieves the above, he opens his eyes and begins to execute a circular twist with them without moving any other part of his body. The spinning starts being in the same direction as the hands of the clock, and then in the opposite direction. Later, the eyes move horizontally from left to right and vice versa, and finally in a vertical direction, up, down, up. During all the movements, the eyes are felt, and if there are tensions in the extraocular muscles, they are recognized, and an attempt is made to relax them by taking advantage of the movement. When this is achieved, then the rotation moves to the neck and the whole head. The turn of the head is made to the right and then to the left, trying to trace circles as open as possible. Later, the head is moved horizontally to the right, left and again to the right, trying the maximum of flexion. Areas of tension in the neck are located and softened. Once this is achieved, the head is moved in a vertical direction, up and down, and finally tilted to the right and to the left. Now it is the turn of the shoulders. Generally, tensions accumulate in this area, and unblocking them produces a degree of intense but tolerable pain. The shoulders are rotated in circles backwards, trying to make their movement broad and exaggerated. This management is continued by loosening its musculature. If pain is felt, the movement is continued until the unpleasant sensation disappears. Later, the turns are made in the opposite direction, i.e. forward. During the backward turns, the chest is opened, and during the forward turns it is constricted, until the tension in the shoulders disappears and the movements become smooth. Deep breathing can be used by inhaling through the nose and exhaling through the mouth. During exhalation, sounds are emitted, trying to extract with them the pain, if any, caused by the release of tension. The next step in the technique is to loosen the arms. Circular turns of both arms are made first outward and then inward, until their joints with the shoulders are unblocked. Then the arms are flexed and extended repeatedly, loosening the elbow joints, and finally, the same is done with the wrists, turning the hands in circular movements while the arms are extended. Once the above has been completed, we proceed to work with the back. In a standing position, the arms are extended upwards, and squats are performed, bending the back and lowering the arms as they descend, and raising them as they return to the standing position. Now proceed to turn your back to the right and left, trying not to bend your legs while standing. Next, the body is bent to the right and left, maintaining the same standing position, and without bending the legs. In the tilt to the right, the arm on the same side is extended, and the left arm is flexed, and the opposite is done with the tilt to the left. Upon completion of the above, the hands are placed on the belly and hip rolls are performed, first in the same direction as clockwise, and then counterclockwise. The hip should rotate freely and alone, that is, without the rest of the body participating in its movement. Further on, the legs are brought together, keeping the back straight. Placing the hands on the knees, rotate the legs to the right and left until the hip joints are loosened. Up to this point, we have proceeded down from the eyes to the hips, unblocking the joints of each part of the body. Now it is the turn of the legs. Adopting the upright position, and without moving any other part of the body, the legs are bent one after the other backwards, trying to hit the buttocks with the feet. Finally, and in the same position, stand on your toes and then lower your heels until they touch the floor, repeating this movement which loosens the ankles. The duration of each exercise is variable and depends on the initial degree of stiffness of each joint. It is recommended to increase this time as skill is acquired and the exercises are repeated. These should be performed daily, in the morning and on an empty stomach. Once the joints are unblocked, proceed to the next group of preliminary exercises. Dynamic emotional processing. This is a modification of a technique originally proposed by Rajneesh called active meditation. Dynamic emotional processing, EDP, was used in 1985 to help teachers in Mexico work through their traumatic experiences caused by the Mexico City earthquake. More than 15,000 mentors benefited from the PED, so the technique is highly recommended as a first body exploration aimed at emotional expression and stress reduction. The PED consists of 5 steps, each lasting from 2 to 10 minutes. In children up to 10 years of age, 2 minutes are recommended, and 1 minute is added to each step with each subsequent year until the maximum of 10 minutes is reached. Bioenergetic breathing. Standing with eyes closed and without moving from his place, the subject feels his whole body and begins to inhale deeply through the nose and exhale through the mouth. The depth of breathing is maintained while increasing its frequency throughout this first phase until the recommended time is completed. During exhalation, sounds can be emitted as if all the accumulated body tension comes out with them. In fact, during body observation, we try to locate areas of tension, and during exhalation, we externalize them by imagining that they are coming out of the body. All the knowledge about the body's zones of tension obtained during the unblocking of joints is used to locate the remaining tensions and to extract them from the body with the help of the breathing exhalation. 2. Free expression. At the end of step 1, the body's oxygen level will have increased, and with it, the amount of energy in the body. In this second phase, this energetic accumulation is expressed freely. You can jump, scream, make faces, throw yourself on the floor, run, or any other manifestation, with the only restriction of not harming yourself, your companions, or objects. This step is performed with open eyes. Through the free expression of movements, we try to unblock areas of rigidity to the point of being able to move all body areas, arms, legs, neck, mouth, eyes, as if they were made of a plastic material, ductile or without any rigidity. 3. Concentration. At the end of the recommended time, the free expression suddenly stops. The subject closes his eyes and remains immobile and stationary, feeling his whole body and accepting whatever happens inside him. The energy flows that were activated during the second phase are allowed to transit without blocking or diverting them. Little by little, the bodily and respiratory agitation will diminish until a new level of balance is achieved, smooth and tension-free. When this happens, a point on the body is located approximately 2 centimeters below the navel. Without losing your attention, you jump, landing on your heels as you touch the floor. At the moment of falling, the body energy is concentrated in the area located 2 centimeters below the navel, and with all possible strength and a high emotional charge, the syllable "hu" is emitted. This sound should come from the bowels with all possible emotional charge, extracting the remaining tensions. At the end of the time allotted for this step, the jumps are suddenly stopped, and the body is observed, feeling and accepting all its sensations. 4. Silent observation. This observation is maintained in silence and with the eyes closed. The attention is directed towards the bodily sensations, letting flow what should flow without deviations or interruptions. Little by little, the agitation provoked by the jumps will diminish until calm and relaxation is reached. 5. Expression with music. In a situation with a musical background and with the same time lapse as before, a dance of gratitude to the body is expressed bodily. The body is allowed to follow the rhythm of the music, expressing it with freedom and grace. If there is no external music, the dance can be performed to one's own tune. At the end of the PED, the practitioner is ready to do a first relaxation. The objective of this is not only to rest and continue with the process of releasing tension, but also to advance in the deep body purification. Systematic relaxation. Lying on the back with eyes closed, legs slightly open and palms facing up, systematic relaxation is initiated by feeling the whole body in the here and now. Breathing is soft and calm, and attention is concentrated on it without forcing oneself. First, the toes are relaxed. To do this, the practitioner concentrates on them, moves them, and then tenses them to the limit. At the maximum point of tension, he suddenly relaxes them and, at the same time, speaks to them, asking them to be relaxed and without any problem. Exactly the same is done with the soles of the feet, ankles, legs, and thighs. Each area is felt, moved, tensed to the maximum, and then relaxed, talking to it and asking for peace and rest. When reaching the hips, the above is repeated with them, with the buttocks, the anus, the sexual organs, and the pubis, feeling all these parts, moving them, tensing them to the maximum, and then suddenly canceling all the tension and speaking to them, asking them for rest and relaxation. We continue with the back, belly, chest, arms, and shoulders, repeating in them the sequence of sensation, movement, tension, and relaxation, accompanied by the suggestion of rest and absence of problems. When the neck is reached, it is felt, moved to one side and the other, tensed and relaxed. The same is done with the lower jaw, mouth, cheeks, eyes, and between the eyebrows, speaking to and soothing each part. At the end, the whole body is felt as a unit. You move it, you tense it from the tips of the toes to the head, trying to increase this tension as much as possible, and then the whole body relaxes, asking for peace, rest, and absence of problems. You remain totally relaxed, feeling the body silence for a few minutes. This lapse can be accompanied by soft music and the aroma of a purifying incense. Relaxation of internal organs. After several minutes, the work of relaxation of the internal organs begins. For this, the practitioner returns to pay attention to his breathing, which is slow, calm, and isochronous. He visualizes his lungs and talks to them, asking them to be relaxed and assuring them that there are no problems, that they are perfectly healthy and strong. He imagines that in the inhalation a purifying energy from the environment penetrates his lungs, and that the blood that enters to oxygenate itself incorporates this energy in its globules and its liquid. Now the attention shifts to the heart. The heartbeat is felt and heard. You ask the heart for peace and assure it that it is healthy and strong. Visualize the blood oxygenated, purified, and full of revitalizing energy, bathing all the cells of the heart, extracting toxins from them, and leaving them clean of impurities. Next, the stomach is visualized, cleansed, and relaxed. The same is done with the spleen and kidneys. Attention is directed to the sexual organs, and they are relaxed and purified. Finally, the concentration is located in the brain. The brain is penetrated and visualized as being purified by the blood until it is clean and relaxed. For a few minutes, you enjoy this internal and external relaxation. During inhalation, the revitalizing energy of the environment continues to be incorporated, oxygenating and purifying the blood and carrying it to all the body cells, both inside and on the surface. Energy ascent. The same point located 2 centimeters below the navel, activated during the PED, is visualized as a place of entry and concentration of energy. In the same lying down position as before, the attention is directed towards this point, visualizing that during the inhalation, all the subtle and powerful energy of the space penetrates into it. This energy is brought into the body up to the spine and is visualized ascending the spine during inhalation. First, imagine it rising and, with practice, feel it until it reaches first the space between the eyebrows and then the top of the head, from where it exits on the exhalation. Am Relaxation. As the energy penetrates through the point below the navel and is ascending, say to yourself, silently, I am, and as it exits through the space between the eyebrows or the crown, say, I am. Continue this maneuver until you feel totally identified with the meaning of the phrase. Rainbow Relaxation. This relaxation produces a deep body purification effect and is performed without abandoning the previous posture and as a continuation of the I am relaxation. By making the energy penetrate through the area located 2 centimeters below the navel, the practitioner visualizes the color red, either in pure form or with the help of an image of a red flower or a tomato. The red color is introduced into the body, and the practitioner imagines that all the cells of the body are of that color. Next, he does the same but with the color orange, either pure or with the help of an image of a carrot. Then he does the same with yellow, green, blue, and violet. When he arrives at the violet color, he imagines that his body is bathed in that color, and that he floats in the middle of an atmosphere that becomes lighter and lighter from a dark violet to a light and bright violet. Finally, the light violet color transforms into a pure bright white. On the inhalation, he brings the white into his body and makes it rise up his spine. On the exhalation, the white comes out of the top of his head as if it were an all-filling fountain. To end this relaxation, feel your whole body as a totally white unit, both on its surface and inside. Rejuvenation Exercises. The following exercises slow down the aging process. To perform them, the lying position is abandoned, and, using a comfortable chair, a bench, or a cushion placed on the floor, the practitioner sits comfortably with the back straight and eyes closed. The exercises described below and performed in the sitting position were discovered by Taoist masters who, through their use, came to live for several hundred years. We will see later that Olmec meditation boasts similar results. The first rejuvenation exercise consists of clashing the upper and lower teeth for 36 times, concentrating on it with all possible attention. At the end of the above, the fingertips of both hands are intertwined and placed on the nape of the neck, pressing the ears with the palms and with the thumbs rubbing the jugulars on the neck. Inhale, moving the energy up the entire spine until it reaches the crown, and exhale, moving the energy down from the crown to the base of the spine. Repeat the cycle of inhalation and exhalation 9 times, and observe the result, accepting whatever sensation and component of experience results. Next, the ears are pressed again with both palms, placing the fingers on the back of the neck, but without intertwining their tips. The thumbs rub the jugulars, while the index fingers alternately hit both sides of the nape of the neck a total of 48 times. The Chinese call this step playing the celestial drum. At the end, the sensations are observed and accepted as they are. The fourth step of this technique consists of turning the back to the right and to the left 12 times. Finally, the palms of the hands are rubbed together until a warmth is awakened in them. They are placed on both kidneys, and using inhalation, this heat is absorbed. Taoist Meditation of the Microcosmic Orbit. There are a large number of meditation techniques oriented to the management of body energy. These techniques are based on the consideration that there are bodily zones that act as points of fusion of the energy and even as generators of the same. The activation of these zones has the effect of producing a change in the state of consciousness, and therefore, in the experience. I will mention in a later section the technique of the Brahma Kumaris, in which the point of concentration of attention is between the eyebrows. In India, this point is considered important, and in one of the chapters of the Hindu Raja Yoga, it is suggested to concentrate the attention there, to activate the perception of an inner light that has the effect of expanding the consciousness. In this technique, the meditator concentrates on the space between the eyebrows until he feels some sensation there, and then activates the luminous perception mentioned above. Other points of concentration are the top of the head, in its central area or vertex. The concentration of attention there is used in some practice of the Chinese Tai Chi system. In Zen meditation, the zone of concentration is the hara around the navel, producing an increase in willpower. Yogi Yoganeshvar, a centuries-old meditator from the city of Rishikesh in India, suggests the flow of body energy from the hara to the vertex as a method of expanding consciousness and producing states of ecstasy. In this technique, the meditator first concentrates on the hara and, during inhalation, brings the energy up to the vertex. Of all the techniques of body energy management, the most complete is the Taoist meditation of the microcosmic orbit. Therefore, I will give a detailed description of this technique in this section. The following drawing presents the points on which the meditator should concentrate his attention during the development of the microcosmic orbit. The arrows indicate the direction of the flow from point A to point N. The meditator sits comfortably and with his back straight. He begins by attending to the area around his navel, until he detects a tingling, a pressure, a vibration, or any other sensation in it. Once this is achieved, visualize a movement of the sensation towards point B in the genital region. At the moment he feels any sensation in his genitals, he sends it towards point C in the perineum region, between the anus and the genitals. Further on, it sends the sensation towards point D, located in the sacrum. At this point, upon feeling the presence of the sacrum, he makes a slight sacral extraction movement and continues to point E and from there to the other points, going up his back until he reaches point J, located on the crown or vertex in the highest and most central area of the skull. The sensation at this point should be clear and is strengthened if the meditator raises his eyes as if to focus on the crown of the head. Further on, the sensation is sent to the space between the eyebrows at the K point. The passage from between the eyebrows to the throat is through the bridge of the tongue. The tongue is placed in a position where its tip touches the upper palate. This operation closes the orbit and, according to Taoism, acts as a conductor between the middle brow and the throat. In fact, the recommendation is to maintain this contact with the tongue attached to the upper palate throughout the meditative exercise. From the throat, the sensation is sent to the M point in the center of the chest, at the level of the heart, and then to the N, located in the center of the belly and at a height equidistant between the M point of the heart and the A of the navel. When the navel is reached, the orbit is repeated as many times as possible. The path of the microcosmic orbit was a secret technique reserved for the exclusive use of Chinese emperors and their consorts. By means of this technique, besides other benefits, it is possible to make the sexual energy flow, which is why it is advisable to practice it during sexual intercourse. If this is performed on both partners, the sexual energy is transmuted. There is a great deal of detail about Taoist techniques that I have had to omit for lack of space. The technique presented here is considered a first step in the mastery of bodily energy. Creation of the four Pakuas. In the Taoist tradition divulged by the master Mantuk Chia, there is talk of the creation of an immortal pearl inside the human body, which, when spun around the microcosmic orbit, brings as a result great benefits to the practitioner. This pearl of consciousness and energy is produced after 4 Pakuas are inscribed in the body, which consist of 3 octahedrons embedded one inside the other, interconnected and located. The first around the navel, the second at the E-point opposite the navel, and the other 2 in the lateral positions of the body at the level of the navel. Each Pakua has the following form. For prolonged periods, if the rhythm is accompanied by both hands, it increases the balance between the right and left sides and helps to release tensions and purify the body. Breathing exercises. In India and Tibet, breathing exercises are used as a preamble to meditation because they help strengthen the nervous system, balance it, and purify it. There are a large number of these exercises that are part of a science and art called pranayama. Here we will review 3 of these exercises, which will prepare us for the practice of meditation. Alternate pranayama. This is a technique originating in India whose use strengthens the nervous system and balances it, presumably through an increase in the coherence and correlation between both brain hemispheres, right and left. According to tradition, the effect of this exercise is cumulative, and the more it is practiced, the more benefits it brings to the practitioner. This exercise begins by plugging the right nostril with the thumb of the right hand and inhaling through the left nostril. Then the left nostril is blocked using the index finger of the right hand, and the right nostril is unclogged and exhale through it. Now inhale through the right side, keeping the left one covered. Then cover the right one, uncover the left one, and exhale through there. Inhale through the left side, cover the left side, and exhale through the right side. Inhale through the right side, covering the left side, and so on. The exercise is continued in the same way, alternating the breathing. It is possible to begin by maintaining the respiratory alternation for 1 minute and, in successive occasions, increasing the time up to a maximum of 20 or 30 minutes. Tibetan Pranayama. This breathing technique, originally from Tibet, has an almost immediate purifying effect on the nervous system. It is based on the existence of subtle channels through which energy transits. The purpose of this technique is to cleanse these channels and purify them of all obstructions. According to its tradition of origin, there are 3 main channels in the body. A right channel, which can be entered through the right nostril, which runs up the head passing through the forehead, the top and the nape of the neck, and down the back approaching the origin of the spine. A left channel, which connects with the right channel at the base of the spine, ascends the back, crosses the nape of the neck, the stop and the forehead, and ends at the left nostril. And finally, a central channel which begins at the crown at the top of the head, penetrates the spine and ends at its base, where it interconnects with the lateral channels. The technique begins by plugging the right nostril and inhaling through the left, visualizing an energy that accompanies the inhalation, penetrating the left channel and following its anatomy and trajectory until it descends to the base of the spine. At this point, the left nostril is covered, the right nostril is uncovered, and exhaled through it, visualizing the energy penetrating the right channel at the base of the spine and going up it until it exits through the right nostril. The same procedure is repeated 3 times. When this is concluded, the left nostril is blocked and inhaled through the right nostril, penetrating the channel on the same side up to its base in the spine. Now the left nostril is uncovered, obstructing the right nostril, and exhaled through the first one, penetrating the left channel at the base of the spine and following its course until it exits through the left nostril. This step is repeated 3 times. At the conclusion of the above, it is inhaled simultaneously through both nostrils, penetrating the 2 lateral canals. The energy is carried to the base of the spine and, upon arriving there, penetrates the central orifice and, during exhalation, rises through this to the crown or vertex located in the highest part of the head. This last step is also repeated 3 times. This exercise is completed when 3 cycles of 3 complete repetitions are performed. Bashtika Pranayama. This is one of the most powerful breathing exercises. Its use is recommended only after all the above body, rejuvenation, and breathing exercises have been performed. The energy involved in Bashtika Pranayama is very powerful, and therefore it is recommended to practice it only once a day. Its use allows to focus the body energy, concentrating it in the highest part of the head. Any deviation of this energy can cause serious disturbances, so its practice requires perfect concentration, total calm, and a situation that ensures an absence of distractions. With these caveats, I describe the steps of this technique below. The practice should be performed in a seated position and with eyes closed. First, rapid abdominal breathing is activated and held for 1 to 2 minutes. Leaning forward, the air is completely exhaled from the lungs. The abdominal energy is felt, and while inhaling slowly but deeply, the energy begins to rise through the central channel of the spine. When the energy has reached the level of the navel, tighten the sphinx muscles of the anus. This operation serves as a lock or key that closes the possibility of the energy going down. The process of energetic ascent is continued until the throat is passed. At that moment, the chin is pressed against the sternum, which closes the central channel at that level and prevents the energy from descending from there. In this position, the air is held while all the concentration is located in the central and highest part of the head. You try to bring the energy to that point and keep it there while holding your breath for as long as possible. When this limit is reached, the head is raised and the air is slowly exhaled until normal breathing is resumed. The bodily sensations are observed with attention, accepting them until a balance is achieved. We are now ready to begin the meditative work explained in the following sections. Before doing so, I would like to mention that one of the most effective preliminary practices to achieve bodily purification and balance, Hatha Yoga, has not been included here due to lack of space and the existence of complete texts and manuals dedicated to its exposition. The fact of not having included it here does not mean that its practice is belittled. On the contrary, its practice is highly recommended. Meditation, general conditions. Practically all the techniques of meditation require concentration. Concentration implies the possibility of maintaining fixed attention for relatively long periods of time. Although meditation is a practice that should accompany all the instants of existence, and not only some special periods, it is advisable to initiate its use by practicing it once or twice a day for periods of approximately 20 minutes. The best time for meditation is dawn and dusk. If it is not possible to meditate at that time, any other time can be used. It is recommended to meditate in loose clothing, in a clean, quiet, and insect-free place. That place should be decorated with soft, simple, and pleasant motifs. For the person who appreciates the aroma of incense, it is advisable to use it, since it cleanses the atmosphere. For those who find incense distracting or simply unpleasant, it should be discarded. The ideal posture for meditation is to sit on a cushion placed on the floor, with legs crossed and back straight. A comfortable chair, armchair, or even a bench can also be used. It is not recommended to meditate lying down because this posture could induce sleep. However, people for whom sitting is intolerable can meditate lying down, as long as they remain alert and awake. Any corner of the house can be used for the practice of meditation, as long as there is no distracting stimulus. It is recommended to choose a place that has no other use than the one corresponding to this practice. Meditation should not be done on an empty stomach and, therefore, with hunger, nor after having eaten a lot of food. It is best to do it on a full stomach. Since concentration is an absolutely indispensable element for the practice of meditation, I will begin the description of the techniques with some exercises designed to strengthen concentration. Concentration techniques. Any observable object can be used to strengthen the capacity of attention and therefore concentration. However, it is advisable to start the practice either with a dense object, such as a rock, a plant, a flower, or a clear biological process, such as breathing. We will see later that the classical Hindu system of meditation recommends a sequence of maintaining attention, starting with some dense object, a rock, and continuing with more and more subtle bodies until the object of concentration is the self itself. In Buddhist techniques, concentration on breathing is recommended, observing attentively the entrance and exit of air through the nose, the filling and emptying of the lungs, and the abdominal movements of widening and constriction. In fact, in Zen meditation and Vipassana, the meditative practice begins by witnessing and feeling the respiratory movements until a high precision in their observation is achieved. The reader is recommended to sit comfortably in the place he has prepared for his practice. Next, the eyes should be closed and attention should be paid to the breath, feeling the entrance and exit of the air until the breath is the only element that occupies the consciousness. Of course, the latter is difficult to achieve on the first attempt. Generally, while paying attention to breathing, to the filling and emptying of the lungs, and the passage of air through the nose, distracting thoughts or bodily sensations that are unrelated to the breathing process appear. It is not advisable to repress these thoughts or deny bodily sensations. Any attempt at repression or denial distances the practitioner from the true meaning of the practice, and should not be done under any circumstances. It should be remembered that what we are talking about is to achieve unity and contact with oneself, and this is only possible if one accepts and observes, because it becomes impossible if one represses or judges the experience one is living, whatever its nature may be. Therefore, the thoughts that arise during the attention on the breath must be accepted. Let them pass and disappear by themselves without trying to repress them or fight against them. The same should be done with respect to any bodily sensation, emotion, sound, or image that appears during the practice of concentration on the breath. The latter should be calm, quiet, and balanced. Isochronous breathing reveals a calm emotional state, while agitated breathing is a manifestation of an altered emotional state. Little by little, and with constancy and acceptance, a slow and isochronous breathing and a disappearance of distracting thoughts are achieved. The fight against the latter only strengthens them. Therefore, they should be accepted as they are, without judging them or diverting them from their normal course. The process is similar to that of internal cleansing. The mind, at the beginning of the practice, is activated, and judgments, evaluations, and a whole series of accompanying emotions arise. If all these subjective components are accepted and only observed with equanimity and without interfering in their occurrence, they are weakened until an inner silence is achieved, in which the only thing that exists is the entrance and exit of air. Each time a distracting thought appears, it is accepted, observed, and when it disappears, one returns to the concentration on the breath. The latter is the point of reference that gradually becomes the total focus of the consciousness. Some teachers recommend counting either the inhalation or the exhalation, or even both, to help the concentration on the breath become stronger. Thus, for example, Exhalations can be counted from 1 to 5 and back to 1 in a repetitive series of several minutes until concentration is achieved. Other teachers recommend saying to oneself, "Come in" during the inhalation and "go out" during the exhalation, with the same purpose of strengthening concentration. When it is possible to remain attentive and concentrated on the respiratory movements during the 20 minutes of the practice, other objects of concentration can be used. For example, with the eyes open, a flower can be observed with the same attention that was strengthened by concentrating on the breath. It is highly recommended to extend periods of concentration on the breath to everyday life. For example, when walking, being in a meeting, or simply sitting during a break from work. The effect of strengthening attention is highly beneficial in many ways. The ability to solve problems is increased, the memory is sharpened, and even the perceptual processes gain in fineness and depth, as well as thinking and contact with one's own body. Observation of body sensations. The expansion of consciousness implies including more and more observable elements within a unit of observation. This unity encompasses everything. To exclude something would be to limit it. To reach the mystery of unity requires integrating all content, to pass from being a part to being part of the whole. Each incorporation not only expands consciousness, it also transforms its quality, bringing the meditator closer to the source of his consciousness and to the energy that drives evolution. That energy, which unites the separate, also provokes attractions, as between the sexes or consciousnesses. It can be called love. The next step after strengthening the attention through breathing is the observation of the body until it is unified. The meditator, sitting comfortably, begins by focusing on his breathing. He then directs attention to the top of his skull, feeling any sensation without judging it. Tingling, pressure, tingling, or heat. He then moves to the nearby areas of the head until he covers the entire surface. From there, he moves on to other parts: forehead, ears, eyes, mouth, jaw, neck, shoulders, arms, chest, abdomen, back, hips, legs, and feet. After going through the whole body, try to perceive it as a unit, although it is not obligatory to do so at first. Then repeat the tour in the opposite direction from the feet to the head. If any area seems blind, the meditator concentrates on it for a minute to activate any sensation. If this does not happen, continue with the rest of the body and return to that area later. With practice, the path speeds up, and sensations of pleasure or pain should be observed with equal equanimity until both attachment and rejection are dissolved. As the meditator unifies the observation of his or her body, there comes a time when the entire path is done between an inhalation and an exhalation. Then, the next step is to simultaneously observe the whole body as a unit. This technique, described by Buddha in the Satipatthana, is based on observing the body, sensations, mind, and various phenomena with attention, energy, and clarity. It is currently practiced as a form of Vipassana, especially taught by Master Goenka. Emotion observation. Once the observation of the corporal unit is achieved, we proceed to focus the attention on the emotional field. The observation of the sensations that arise spontaneously on the surface of the body, and their subsequent unification in an act of simultaneous observation of all parts of the body, is a first level of unification. Obviously, in addition to bodily sensations, there are other levels of activity that must be included within the consciousness in order to achieve a greater expansion of it. One of these levels is the emotional level. Of course, an emotion correlates with a series of bodily changes and, in a sense, could be reduced to them, so that the observation of bodily sensations suffices to incorporate the emotional world within the act of conscious observation. However, the level of emotional activity transcends that of bodily sensation, and therefore there is a meditation technique focused on its observation as such. Both during the concentration on the breath and the observation of bodily sensations, emotions such as anger, rage, joy, sadness, ecstasy can arise. We have learned to consider some of these emotions as positive and others as negative. It will depend on the culture in which we live, the education of our parents, and the type of school we attended, the judgment we make about our emotional states. If our upbringing was very rigid, we were probably taught to repress or deny certain emotions and to consider them as foreign and separate from ourselves. When, for some reason, one of these emotions arises, breaking through the barrier of repression that has been built into our consciousness, we become frightened and consider that what is happening to us comes from somewhere external and not from within ourselves. In this way, we limit ourselves and obstruct the path towards unity, which implies accepting and considering the existence of a single being focused on an infinite number of manifestations. From this point of view, there is neither the external nor the internal as two separate and independent realms, but only one mind in which everything happens. The observation of emotions has the purpose of bringing us closer to this unity, accepting any experience as part of it. Therefore, when an emotion appears in the practice of meditation, it should be accepted and observed as part of the being that we are, and not repressed or denied as if it were alien or external to ourselves. In this way, the emotion also becomes part of the unified act of being through its acceptance and observation. When an emotion appears, it should be accepted as such and observed with the same equanimity and detachment with which breathing or bodily sensations were observed. Emotion, like thought, develops through a process of birth, maintenance, and death. This process should be observed without identifying with it. It is advisable, when an emotion appears, to make a bodily tour paying attention to the components of sensations that are associated with the emotion. Once this tour is done, it is advisable to observe the emotion as it is, without dissecting its components. The observation of the emotion itself and its components can be repeated several times, until an even observation and identification with the witness of the emotion, and not with the components of the emotion, is achieved. This does not mean that it is recommended not to feel emotions. On the contrary, a healthy emotional life implies great creative intensity and emotional richness. Emotions are part of us, and as such should be accepted and loved. What should be avoided is to fall into emotional dependence or to be subject to the control of our own emotions. One must be master of oneself in each and every one of its levels, qualities, and processes. To complete the process, the meditator opens the eyes and notices the visual images that appear, be they objects, colors, textures, and shapes. This observation with the eyes open should be done with the same awareness with which all the other modalities of the experience were lived, that is, just as thoughts, emotions, breathing, and bodily sensations were observed. If there are movements, they are observed while maintaining the same equanimous and accepting attitude towards everything that happens. Having observed one by one all the ways of perceiving, the meditator closes his eyes again and prepares himself for the following. Breathing, bodily sensations, emotions, and thoughts occur at the same time as visual or auditory perceptions or body movements. There are so many things happening in the present that, as Rajneesh would say, there is no time for anything else. Whoever lives the present with all its richness and intensity has no time for anything else. In self-elusive meditation, the observation of all the components of experience, breath, bodily sensations, emotions, and thoughts, is done simultaneously, so that all levels of experience are unified in the same act of observation. The technique consists of concentrating the attention on the respiratory movements, until they occupy the entire consciousness. Afterwards, the body is moved through, observing and feeling the bodily sensations, until the consciousness of bodily unity is achieved. When the body can be seen as a unity, breathing is added to the observation. In this way, the body is observed as a unit and at the same time as a breathing organism. Further on, the particular components are attended to and observed. The next step consists of observing the breath, the body unit, and the emotions. Afterwards, thoughts are observed and, once integrated, they are incorporated into the simultaneous observation. In this way, a unification of all the contents of the experience is achieved. When this has been achieved, then the visual events of the environment are added to the simultaneous act of observation. The final result of the technique is an experience of reality as it is, and a disappearance of the dichotomy between external and internal, or between observer and observed. A contact with the selfhood of the observer is achieved, which transcends all observed components and at the same time incorporates and includes them in the unity of the observation. The practice of self-elusive meditation results in the expansion of consciousness, a process based on the incorporation of all elements of experience into a unified act of observation. The observer, by adding objects of observation, increases his unifying power and, at a certain moment, transcends a kind of threshold beyond which he feels in contact with a level of the reality of himself that transcends any of the components that have been included in the observation. In other words, one glimpses here a process of disidentification in relation to the body, emotions, thoughts, and environment, and an identification with the observer. This disidentification is neither avoidance nor repression of experience, but its integration into a more expanded order of reality. It can be neither denial nor repression, because these mechanisms are opposed to observation. Everything must be accepted, because otherwise the information is distorted or simply excluded from the field of consciousness. Observation of thoughts. The same situation occurs in relation to cognitive processes. These involve thoughts, ideas, judgments, and a series of analyses that the mind performs from its observational data and history. Thoughts, just like emotions, are part of ourselves and therefore must be accepted and observed. But thoughts do not include us as a whole. Thus, identification with thoughts is an error of appreciation. Thoughts and the mind as a whole should be observed with the same equanimity and detachment with which breathing, bodily sensations, and emotions were witnessed. When a thought appears, the meditator's attention should be directed toward observing its arising, development, and disappearance. The thought is not the self or the identity, but one of its contents. Rarely does a thought appear in isolation. Usually several appear together. These must be observed with equanimity. For example, it is not uncommon for the meditator to ask himself about the meaning of what he is doing, the object of meditation, his own value, etc. All these thoughts should be observed as such, accepting them but not identifying with them. Sooner or later, the thinking activity will diminish and silence will take its place. Observation of internal images. At this point, the meditator directs his attention to his inner images. These can be practically infinite in terms of their shapes, colors, textures, and geometries. They should all be observed in the same way that thoughts or emotions were observed. In the absence of internal images, the meditator observes the dark panorama that appears and tries to locate some luminous point that stands out against the black background. It does not matter the size or coloration of the dot. He approaches it and magnifies it with his mind, entering into it. Whatever appears, he accepts it and observes. In the same way as before, Now the meditator pays attention to the internal sounds that appear in his mind. He becomes aware of their existence, accepts them and observes. If he can, he listens to the background noise and penetrates into it, observing it more and more deeply. Any sound coming from the medium is attended to. Its origin does not matter. The attention opens to listen to everything that happens with the same attitude as before. That is to say, with total acceptance and observing the sounds as they appear. Visual observation of the environment. The meditator can now perform a visual observation. With this description of the self-elusive meditation technique, the reader is empowered to practice it step by step until mastery is achieved. The experience resulting from the proper practice of self-illusion meditation is contact with the pure self, or the reality of the self. This contact strengthens and enables the exploration of other meditation techniques. In short, self-elusive meditation consists of the simultaneous observation of all the contents of conscious experience. This simultaneous observation produces a shift in the focus of experience from its contents to the observation of oneself in the present. This observation of the totality of oneself in the present is called self-illusion. When self-illusion is achieved, the content of the experience changes, and in the face of this change, it is advisable to make a new observation of all the contents of the experience. This second-order self-illusion is more powerful than the first one and transforms again the contents of the experience. Self-illusion meditation is continued until the moment in which the meditator manages to get in touch with his true identity. In the following sections, I will briefly outline different tools of consciousness used by various traditions and teachers. Ultimately, all techniques seem to arrive at the same thing, albeit using different approaches. Some of the techniques I will describe are practiced in established groups, which has the advantage of allowing membership in a tradition and having direct personal guidance. The reader interested in any of these techniques is advised to explore their principles, to live them, and, if his or her interest remains, to establish contact with the groups that practice them. This contact, however, is neither obligatory nor necessary for those who prefer solitary work. I will begin the exposition with Zen meditation, and in each section, I will describe another technique in its basic principles and in its form of application and practice. Zen meditation. A few months before he died, the revered Zen master Shunryu Suzuki said, "Nothing comes from outside our mind. We usually imagine our mind as a receiver of impressions and experiences from outside, but this is not a true understanding of our mind. The true understanding is that the mind includes everything. When you think that something comes from outside, it only means that something appeared in your mind. Nothing from outside is capable of causing any disturbance. You yourself create the waves of your mind. If you leave your mind as it is, it will become calm. This mind is called great mind. If your mind is related to something outside it, this mind is a small mind, a limited mind. If your mind is not related to something outside, then there is no dualistic understanding in the activity of your mind. The activity will then be understood as simply waves of your mind. The great mind experiences everything within itself. Do you understand the difference between the two minds? The mind that includes everything and the mind that relates to something, actually both are the same thing, but the understanding is different, and your attitude towards life will be different according to the understanding you have. That everything is included within your mind is the essence of mind. To experience this is to have a religious feeling. Even when ripples arise, the essence of your mind is pure. It is like crystal clear water with a few ripples. Actually, water always has ripples. Waves are the practice of water. To speak of waves apart from water or water apart from waves is a deception. Water and waves are one. The great mind and the small mind are one. When you understand your mind in this way, you have some security in your feelings. Since the mind expects nothing from outside, it is always full. A mind with waves is not a sick mind, but an amplified mind. Any experience is an expression of the great mind. Zen emphasizes the state of oneness in which there is no external separate from the internal, no subject distinct from the object. The practice of Zen meditation is called Zazen, and this could be understood in the words of Shunryu Suzuki as the direct expression of our true nature. Strictly speaking, for a human being there is no other practice than this practice. There is no other way of life than this way of life. In Zazen, as we shall see later, the meditator gets in touch with himself, and everything becomes new, because the mind has been emptied of distracting concepts, judgments, and contents, and the subject observes reality as it is, without intellectual filters or limiting considerations. In this state of purity, he returns to his basic or essential nature, in which everything is glimpsed with the same amazement as the mind of a newborn child. To be born again, it is first necessary to let die what is known, what limits the understanding or subjects it to the prison of any structure. The Zen state is difficult, if not impossible, to describe, because any description is limiting and restrictive. On the other hand, the pure mind has no limit, and it is only its experience that is the condition to recognize it. Therefore, the greatest difficulty in Zen is not the posture of meditation or the maintenance of concentration, but the contact with the essential purity of one's own nature, free of conceptualizations. The Zen master teaches that very state through the impeccability of his own existence and by using procedures that try to lead the disciple to break with the logical and structured mind. These procedures will be pointed out later. The Zen master was asked to define his system. He responded with silence, making a circle with his arm. On one occasion, another Zen master was visited by an intellectual who sat at the table where tea was served, and began to explain his ideas. The master listened attentively, and then invited him to tea. The intellectual accepted and asked the master for an explanation about Zen. The master looked at him in silence and began to fill his visitor's cup. The astonished visitor watched as the liquid filled the cup, and began to overflow as the master continued to pour. Finally, alarmed, he asked, "The cup is full and overflowing. Why do you keep pouring?" The master smiled and told him that it was like his mind, too full for anything to fit inside. To understand Zen, you must first empty it. Similar stories abound in the literature about Zen. In all of them there transpires a paradoxical state that does not conform to any linear logic, that is not predictable, and that possesses as an attribute naturalness, spontaneity, and a kind of amazement before existence, similar to that of a newborn baby. In Zen, the explanatory concepts of the world disappear to give place to a vision free of mental ties or filters with respect to reality. The latter is the pure self, beyond the mind, the ego, or any intellectual process that tries to reduce it to a logical system. To reach such a state, Zen meditation has devised at least two strategies. The first is to sit with eyes half closed, observing everything that happens in the absolute present of being here and now. The Zen meditator attends to his breathing, focusing his concentration on the area of the body around the navel. As he breathes, he notices the expansion of his belly and its subsequent contraction, following the natural and spontaneous rhythm of inhalation and exhalation. The thoughts that arise during this practice are observed, attending to their birth, development, and disappearance. Sooner or later, thoughts and all mental activity decline until silence takes their place. The meditator observes the silence, and his only motive for attention is what is happening in the present. According to Shunryu Suzuki, in Zen one lives the existence of the great mind, or one mind, within which everything happens without being divided into external or internal, outside or inside. Thoughts are like the swell of the great mind. They are not separated from it. They are part of its nature and constitute its practice or activity. Silence is the lack of swell of the great mind, and the meditator possesses the same nature. Zen cannot be defined, it is beyond definition. The second meditation strategy or technique is the koan. The latter is a question posed by the master, the answer to which is experiential and not logical. To arrive at a solution to the question, it is necessary to transcend linear logic and intellectual conceptualization. Classic koans are, for example, what is the sound that can be made by clapping with one hand? What is mu? What face did you have before you were born? After posing the koan, the disciple devotes himself to meditate on it, until the only question that fills his mind is the koan. There comes a time when the koan is solved, and always its solution involves a leap from logical, linear thinking to another state that transcends the intellectual mind. Vipassana Meditation. I mentioned before the Vipassana meditation technique, pointing out Master Goenka as one of its exponents. In this section, I will expand the description of Vipassana as Goenka teaches it. In this technique, there is an equanimous observation of everything that happens on the surface of the body, attending to the sensations that arise from it, from the highest part of the head to the tips of the toes. According to Goenka, this observation brings as a consequence a deep bodily purification and a contact with reality as it is. The meditator sits comfortably, with eyes closed and back straight. He begins his practice by paying attention to the breathing movements. He first observes how the air enters and leaves his nose during inhalation and exhalation, respectively. He keeps his attention focused on the breath until he is able to remain totally absorbed in it, without missing a single respiratory cycle. At this point, he perceives subtle details of the process, such as the sensation of the air passing through the nostrils, the temperature changes in the nostrils, and the delicate movements of the hairs inside the nose. Once he has reached this degree of concentration, he directs his attention to the highest part of his head, in the vertex or crown, and feels that region, accepting with equanimity the sensations that exist there. The characteristics of these sensations do not matter. They can be as varied as tingling, pressure, temperature changes, or vibrations. Whatever the sensation, observe and accept it. Having achieved this, he attends to the area around the central and highest part of his head, also feeling whatever happens there. He goes all over the top of his head, and then does the same with the lateral parts, with his forehead and nape of his neck, accepting with equanimity any sensation that appears on the surface of his body. Follow a body pathway scheme similar to the one described in the section, Observation of Body Sensations. Once he achieves the equanimous observation of the bodily sensations of his whole body, he proceeds to an observation of his bodily unit. Later on, the meditator again makes a tour of the bodily sensations from the tip of his head to his toes, but now he attends a few millimeters below the skin. When he achieves this, he makes another tour penetrating a few millimeters further into his body. These paths are continued until the meditator is able to observe with acceptance and equanimity all that is happening both on the surface of his body and within. The equanimous observation of bodily sensations should accompany daily life, in which the meditator continues to observe all that happens with equanimity. Siddha Meditation. In the north of India, there is a tradition of development of the consciousness known as Shaivism of Kashmir. The great masters of this movement are called the Siddhas, and are supposed to be those characters who have reached the maximum possible development of the consciousness and are in the direct experience of the self. Precisely, the objective of the Siddha meditation is to reach the self, and for this, the meditator uses an internal vibrational instrument that is called mantra. A mantra is a word or phrase that, when repeated, activates an internal process of great power that helps the one who uses it to live the experience of the self. The Siddha meditator sits comfortably and, with closed eyes, gently activates the pronunciation of the mantra, observing its emergence and development. The mantra most commonly used in this technique is Om Namah Shivaya, which means, I pay respect and admiration to my own self. Another mantra used is So Ham, repeated during inhalation, so, and during exhalation, Ham. According to Swami Muktananda, one of the siddhas of this movement, the energy of a master is required to activate the process of experience of the self by the disciple. This energy, which can be transmitted from teacher to student, is called Shakti in the Siddha tradition. Other practices of Siddha meditators are chanting. In practical terms, Siddha meditation can be performed in periods of 20 minutes, during which the meditator focuses his attention on the repetition of one of the two mantras described above. The mantra should appear spontaneously in the mind of the meditator, who only stimulates its appearance and observes its activation and internal development. In order to provide greater clarity about Siddha meditation, some excerpts from the book Siddha Meditation by Swami Muktananda, Siddha Yoga Dham of Spain, 1978, are reproduced below. In Siddha meditation, the highest importance is given to the self and its contact by the meditator. The self is the higher essence that dwells in each of us and the basis of happiness. Shiva is used by Muktananda to mean the Supreme Lord dwelling within each person. He is the unchangeable one, the formless absolute, but he also becomes a whole universe of forms while still retaining his unchangeable state. Shakti, literally power, or Chitti, literally consciousness, are names for the aspect of Shiva that is active and makes the many manifest. In fact, she is the many, works cited. Shiva is neither Shaivite nor Buddhist. He is yourself. Shiva is neither Hindu nor Muslim nor Christian. He is the self of all. Shiva is inner happiness. Shiva is unlimited love. Mukteshwari 11,370, works cited. Shiva, the self, is found in everything. He is spread over all parts of the universe. He is matter in material objects and consciousness in conscious beings. He adopts attributes and, at the same time, lacks them. It is he who plays everywhere. How can there be anything different from him? Svachandatantra Op. Cit. For Muktananda, a true yogi does not have to retire to a desolate forest. He does not have to force his eyes to remain closed, nor suspend his breath to pass into inert samadhi. Shiva Sutras 1/9, works cited. For this saint, there is nothing other than himself that he can renounce, nothing other than himself that he can acquire meditation upon. Shiva Sutras 1/7, works cited. The heart of Muktananda's teachings is that all that exists, all that we see, hear, and touch is God. Any dualism that excludes part of experience is in fact excluding part of God. Shiva himself is the experience and the experiencer, works cited. Parashiva is the actual experiencer of all states. Ignorance is the attitude of I am the one who acts and the one who enjoys, who but he can think with the mind and speak with the tongue. Shiva Sutras 1/11, works cited. The self who uses the senses and the organs of the body is none other than the Supreme Lord, who has limited himself for his own amusement or enjoyment. The only thing that prevents Shiva, in the form of an individual, from recognizing his own true nature is his false identification with his actions, sense pleasures and thoughts. When we eat, Shiva is eating. When we hear, Shiva is hearing. Remaining aware of this is the form of worship and meditation, works cited. Siddha Meditation does not accept dualism or division into moral categories, such as good or bad. According to the Siddha, nothing disturbs the basic oneness of all things. Meditate on Parashiva, which pervades equally everywhere, within and without. Consider the ceaseless flow of images arising in the mind as the mind itself, and you will be free. The phantasmagoria of dreams and innumerable thoughts is but the mind, and the mind is vibrant Chitti. With that true vision, the mind becomes still. To become completely still by seeing the whole cosmos as a play of consciousness and immersing oneself in that divine play. To meditate on Shiva by becoming Shiva. This is the consciousness of the pure self. Shiva Sutras 1/16, works cited. The meditator should put all his senses on the One Self and become completely absorbed in him. He should meditate on Shiva being the same one in all different thoughts and objects, and lose himself in this meditation. Shiva Sutras 2/3, works cited. For Muktananda, meditation is a matter of right understanding, not of concentration or any other technique of exclusion. The meditator should not think, this is a good thought and that is a bad one, or this thought is the one I am concentrating on, and that one interrupts my concentration and should be rejected. He should see all thoughts as simply thoughts. The meditator should sit comfortably, without straining. Whatever comes should be quietly recognized as a form of God, and not only are the thoughts Shiva, but the meditator who witnesses them is also Shiva, and should slowly enter into them and submit to the flow of the mind. When the surrender is complete, mind and time stop, works cited. All his ideas are Shiva, his images are Shiva, his agitation is Shiva, and his consequences are also Shiva. This consciousness is true meditation. See any thought vibrating in the mind as a ray of Chitti. This is the most effective technique of meditation. Ishwara Pratyabhajna 3/12, works cited. The state to which the Siddha meditator arrives, and the Siddha realized, is that of total freedom. The Siddha is one who has attained mastery over the senses and their objects, one who sees this world, experienced by the ignorant, as full of pain, as the external play of Parashakti, one who has burned away, in the fire of inner knowledge, the imaginary distinctions of virtue and sin, joy and liberation, the mundane and spirituality. He sees all thoughts that arise within him, whether good or bad, as the movements of the self. He has become the universe, the Lord of the universe and the soul of the universe. He is his own path and his own destiny. He is wholly active and at the same time, wholly inactive. He is conscious of, I am the Supreme Shiva. Shiva Sutras 3/13, works cited. He is always in natural samadhi, while eating, drinking, sleeping, waking, playing, talking, bathing, enjoying sensory pleasures and meditating. He lives always in spontaneous joy. Shiva Sutras 1/9, works cited. In conclusion, Siddha meditation affirms that within each one is the self or Shiva, and that by establishing contact with him, we recognize our true identity and attain true happiness, not dependent on possessions, structures, or agreements. This self is the witness of the mind, the true self. The technique of repeating a mantra such as Om Namah Shivaya is a means to achieve contact with the self, never an end in itself. In fact, the Siddha who has attained the self does not require any technique and understands that the use of mantra or even concentration on the witness of the mind were means to which he should not become attached. He also understands that the self was always there, but that he was not aware of its presence. Since according to Siddha meditation, the self or Shiva is found in any experience irrespective of its quality or characteristics, the Siddha finds the self in everything and everyone. Transcendental Meditation. This technique also uses a mantra whose use, in addition to activating an energetic process, serves as the object of attention. Any thought has its origin in a level of consciousness prior to any manifestation, and therefore transcendent with respect to it. The same happens with any word that is pronounced. The initial order belongs to a transcendent order which is common to every effect. The mantra, in Transcendental Meditation, serves to access that previous and transcendent level with respect to the manifestations of the concrete or objective reality. For 20 minutes, the meditator sits with his eyes closed and gradually penetrates within himself, without forcing or pressuring himself. For it, he pronounces his mantra attending to its origin itself. The mantras used by Transcendental Meditation are chosen according to the specific and individual characteristics of its practitioners, and therefore I cannot suggest them. However, since the logic of the process is to use an internal manifestation to access its origin, one can use any word that has a positive meaning, such as love, faith, or God, observing the mental process that activates it and its development until it appears clearly in the field of consciousness. According to Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, the best-known representative of Transcendental Meditation, the origin of all thought is linked to a field or fundamental matrix that also sustains matter and objects. This matrix is the field of all possibilities, and the transcendental meditator attempts to contact it through the use of mantra and its observation. In other words, the mantra is an artificial medium that appears in the mind of the meditator from the same field of all possibilities, which is the origin of any thought or word. In repeating the mantra, the meditator's task is to pay attention to the process that gives rise to it, attending to its arising and to the matrix antecedent to it. This operation allows the meditator to get in touch with the field of all possibilities. Now, according to Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, this field is pure consciousness and transcends any manifestation. Hence the name Transcendental Meditation, implying that the subject who practices it will gain access to the source of consciousness, to its own transcendent origin, although mantra can be any word or thought. Since all mental contents have the same origin in the field of all possibilities of pure consciousness, there are certain terms that have been used for hundreds and even thousands of years and that, so to speak, maintain a special energy bequeathed by the minds of meditators and saints of the past. These living, vibrant mantras assist the process of connecting with the fundamental matrix and are used extensively in this technique. The mantras are assigned during a special ceremony and are supposed to be individual and specific to each person. In reality, there are mantra categories that have been chosen based on common characteristics of meditators. Mantra repetition in Transcendental Meditation is subtle and non-compulsive. In other words, the meditator lightly stimulates the appearance of the mantra in his or her mind without forcing it. At the beginning of the practice, this subtlety is difficult to achieve, but with time it is observed that a tiny mental pressure is enough for the mantra to appear by itself and to repeat itself following a pattern that no longer seems to depend on the meditator or his will, but on a process that is experienced as independent and automatic. When this happens, the observation is directed towards the origin of the appearance of the mantra until the personal consciousness is placed in the field of pure consciousness, free of contents and transcendent with respect to them. When this contact is achieved, the mantra and its repetition are no longer necessary. In Maharishi's words, when the boat reaches its destination, it is no longer needed. Maharishi Mahesh Yogi's group has been interested in the physiological and physical correlates of his meditation technique. They claim that the meditator of his technique normalizes his physiological functions, heals from diseases, and becomes resistant to contagions of any kind. Since the fundamental matrix, besides being the origin of consciousness and matter, is the common background of all physical forces, Maharshi's group claims that, with the use of their meditation, physical portents such as defying gravity can be achieved. In fact, a great deal of interest of Maharshi's group has been derived toward the achievement of levitation. According to his theories, when consciousness becomes pure in contact with the fundamental matrix, gravitation disappears. On the other hand, they claim that the action of a meditator in achieving contact with pure consciousness spreads the atmosphere of purity and facilitates the spiritual life of entire communities. They have studied crime rates in populations with few and many meditators and have found that in the latter, the rates of negative behaviors decrease significantly. These results fall within what Maharshi calls a technology of consciousness appropriate for the New Age. Sufi Meditation. Sufis are the mystics of Islam. In addition to living according to very particular ethical and religious principles, in which special importance is given to the practice of spiritual love and the intensification of mystical contact with God, they use different techniques of meditation oriented to their spiritual development. Among these, two will be presented here. The first is called Seeker, and its exposition is in accordance with the way Pir Vilayat Inayat Khan teaches it. The second is an active meditation technique practiced by the Sufi dervishes. Seeker meditation. This technique uses the repetition of an Arabic phrase, pronounced as follows: Allah ilaha il Allahu, and which means, there is no God Allah except God Allah. The meditator sits comfortably, preferably on a cushion placed on the floor, and turns his head to face to the left. During exhalation, he turns his head slowly to the right, pronouncing Allah ilaha as he does so. This pronouncement is made aloud with great passion, and with attention to the meaning of what is being said. There is no God. In symbolic terms, the meditator is going through the world considering it, in its physical aspect, detached from the divinity. The turning is done with half-open eyes, looking at the world. Next, the head is placed in a central position. The head is inhaled. The head is lowered, closing the eyes and exhaling with the word il, except, which is pronounced with full force and conviction. Now, inhale while raising the head and in an internal whisper pronounce the name of God Allah. The head continues to rise until it is placed in a position where the closed eyes are up, and whisper Hu, feeling how the energy goes up the spine until it reaches the highest part of the head. The meaning of the seeker is that there is only one God, and this is found within and not in worldly things. The same sequence as above is repeated, attending to the meaning, the breath, and the handling of the energy, until the meaning and the speaker become one and the same. Active dervish meditation. This technique is designed to strengthen the meditator's contact with his center. This contact, when authentic, resists any change coming from the outside world. The dervishes stimulate, through this meditation, an intense perceptual alteration of the world and maintain their center in spite of it. The technique is performed with the meditator standing, placing his right arm extended above his head, and the left arm extended towards the ground. With the eyes open and maintaining the same line of vision, the practitioner begins to turn on himself in a leftward direction, counterclockwise, with his left leg as the axis and the right leg as the driving force of the turn. This is continued, accelerating it up to the possible limit. Due to the effect of the rotation, the perception of the environment will lose constancy and fixity. In spite of this, the practitioner must remain in his center. After several minutes, the rotation begins to slow down until it stops. Kabbalistic Meditation. The origin of Kabbalah goes back to the writings of Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai, who, in the company of his son Eliezer, remained for 13 years hidden in a cave, fleeing from the Romans who had invaded Israel. In the isolation of his cave, Bar Yochai wrote the Zohar, and in it he exposed a whole mystical system, that has served as a catapult for the later development of the Kabbalah. According to R.E.A. Kaplan, c. Meditation and Kabbalah, edited by Samuel Weiser, New York, 1982, the science of Kabbalah is divided into three main areas: theoretical, meditative, and practical. There are about 3,000 books in print on Kabbalah, and most of them are devoted to the theoretical part, which deals with the mysteries of the spiritual world, the structure of the angelic realms, and the Sephiroth or divine emanations. In fact, the word Kabbalah has its origin in the Hebrew word lakabal, which means to receive. The Kabbalist prepares himself to receive inspiration, information, and energy from the spiritual realms, and the meditative part of the system is designed to prepare the practitioner for this reception. Practical Kabbalah is a kind of white magic that deals with the techniques necessary to activate supernatural powers. The greatest Kabbalist of all times, Rabbi Isaac Luria, better known by the name Ari or Lion of Safed, considered practical Kabbalah as dangerous and even pernicious to spiritual development, and instead encouraged both theoretical and meditative Kabbalah. In this section, I will discuss some of the meditative techniques proposed by Kabbalah, which are centered around the process of yihudim, or unifications. It will not be possible to include other techniques here because they involve and require a deep knowledge of the Hebrew language, or because they are too specialized and extensive for the brief space of this paper. In Judaism, a fundamental importance is given to unification. In fact, the most sacred prayer for a Jew, the one he pronounces at the moment of death, goes like this: "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one." In the same way, the Kabbalah speaks of the existence of 5 different levels of the soul, from a soul linked to the body and which serves as an energetic support, called nephesh, to the highest level of the soul, called yehida or singularity, which implies a unification. When a human being is born, he brings with him different portions of the soul of different beings that preceded him. His work of development in this life consists in purifying all levels until he reaches the singularity. This level is the unity with oneself, the selfhood of the pure self or the true identity. Therefore, one of the Kabbalistic meditation techniques consists in meditating on the singularity of the self, asking oneself who one is, and then placing oneself in identity with oneself. To achieve the purification of the different portions of the soul, it is necessary to accept them and to lead an absolutely ethical life, simple and in constant remembrance of God. Each obstacle that life presents to the meditator is an opportunity for purification in order to reach the singularity. When one of these obstacles is overcome, one acquires greater power and purity. According to Dr. Krasimira Kadamova, this notion is similar to a phenomenon in quantum mechanics called tunneling with friction. In this phenomenon, it is observed that when an elementary particle encounters an obstacle in its path that prevents it from following its path and manages to overcome it, the energy of the particle increases. Also, according to Dr. Krasimira Kadamova, contemporary physics speaks of the existence of an immaterial bosonic field. When parts of this field interact with each other, a material object, a particle, is produced which belongs to another field, that of matter or fermionic field. The objects of the fermionic field have singularity in the sense that each elementary particle is unique and different, and it is not possible for 2 particles to have the same state. When the friction tunneling occurs and a particle acquires higher energy, it becomes part of another field, the parafermionic field, in which it is possible for 2 particles to have the same state. There, 2 singularities are unified. In the bosonic field, the possibility of unification is infinite. The Kabbalah meditation technique that activates the state of singularity would seem to correspond to the individuality of a particle in the fermionic field. Once singularity is achieved, there is a technique that stimulates unification with other singularities in what would appear to be an entry into the parafermionic field. This technique consists in the visualization of the word one. The meditator sits comfortably, closes his eyes, and then imagines the word one and penetrates its meaning. First, he associates this meaning with his own body until, subsequently, he succeeds in feeling its oneness. Then he continues meditating on the one in relation to other human beings, until he feels the oneness that exists among all human beings. Later, he meditates on the one in relation to the planet Earth with all its inhabitants, until he feels oneness with the planetary consciousness. Then, he applies the meditation on the one in relation to the entire galaxy, and finally to the universe as a totality. If the meditation is successful, the meditator will have experienced the oneness existing on all the above-mentioned levels, from his organic body to the whole universe. In terms of contemporary physics, he will have succeeded in placing himself first in the fermionic field as a singularity, then in the parafermionic field in unity with other singularities, and finally, he will have penetrated the bosonic field. About the origin of the universe, there are also coincidences between physics and Kabbalah. According to physics, this origin was the explosion of a particle at the beginning of time. This explosion created space, time, and the known universe. Before it, there was neither time nor space. From the explosion, the universe began an expansive movement and a multiplication of its particles in a fermionic field. This expansion occurs at the present time and will have a limit after which the universe will initiate a contrary movement of concentration until it returns to its origin to explode again and initiate a new time and an expansive movement. This theory, called Big Bang, assumes a cyclic existence for the universe and denies the existence of anything prior to the first explosion, since before it, time did not exist. The Kabbalah, on the other hand, considers that before the primordial explosion, the entire universe was illuminated by the divine light, and there was nothing that was subtracted from it. In a supreme act of creation, God created a zone free of his light through a process called Tzimtzum, and in the resulting void implanted a spark of his luminosity, thereby creating the initial explosion and the subsequent expansion of space and time. Prior to the Tzimtzum there was neither time nor space, but there was something, and this something was, as I said before, the divine light penetrating everything without discontinuity. The development of the human consciousness implies getting in contact or receiving the divine light through the above-mentioned techniques of meditation and purification. Man and woman are, according to the Kabbalah, a model of the same process of Tzimtzum, of implantation of a spark of light and of primordial explosion and subsequent expansion of the universe. The woman contains an organ, the vagina and the womb, which represents the void where the spark of light will be implanted. The latter is represented in the spermatic cell that interacts with the ovum and produces an organic explosion and the creation and birth of a new universe. The man represents the giver of the light and the woman, the receiver of the light, and the creator of life expanding within her. For this reason, Kabbalah gives special importance to the human couple, to love and to the sexual act, considering them sacred. The sexual act in love and responsible fidelity constitutes, for Kabbalah, a sacred meditation. Man and woman together are defined as the true human being. We will see later that in the theistic meditation, the sexual union is also sacralized and used to advance in the path of spirituality. On the other hand, woman and man are different in the sense that the former is able to contact God in any of his manifestations more easily than man. The latter requires the use of a mental instrument to achieve this, thus being able to create true intellectual systems that serve him to achieve communion with the divine. The woman, who loves this masculine process of creation, and the man, capable of seeing in the woman the creator of life in the capacity of communion with God in all its manifestations, constitute the ideal of the human couple. Mahamudra Meditation. The Mahamudra meditation technique is part of the Tibetan Buddhist tradition, being one of the most important methods to reach enlightenment. Milarepa, known as the holy poet of Tibet, is one of the greatest masters of Mahamudra. He is credited with extraordinary feats related to consciousness, such as levitation and the ability to dematerialize, even crossing rocks with his body. But above all, he stands out for reaching a state of absolute detachment, free of passions, dependencies, and manifestations. According to Mahamudra, the mind in its primordial state is luminous and self-sufficient, and this fundamental state is found in every conscious experience, regardless of its nature. Thus, the self-illumined mind manifests itself in both pleasure and pain, in visual and auditory perception, in every thought and emotion. The task of the meditator is to recognize and experience this state in all his or her experiences. To do this, the technique recommends searching in each experience for the origin of consciousness, which, as already mentioned, is found in both pain and pleasure, since both come from the same origin. The practice of Mahamudra does not require isolation or long periods of concentration. Since each experience has its own enlightenment, Mahamudra meditation can be practiced at any time and place in daily life. However, as in other practices, it is suggested to begin with sessions of about 20 minutes, with eyes closed, observing the mental processes that arise spontaneously or are provoked. For example, the meditator, comfortably seated, directs his attention to his thoughts, observing in them the light of consciousness that also illuminates his emotions, internal images, or bodily sensations. The attention is directed towards what sustains the manifestations, not towards themselves, until the self-illumination at the origin of all experience is achieved. This character of self-illumination is present even in silence, so there is no exception to its existence. The following is a free translation of a text written in the 16th century by Wang Shigdor Zhe, the 9th Karmapa of the Mahamudra tradition. This text explains the Mahamudra meditation technique according to the purest known tradition. When you have awakened from the sleep of ignorance, you will realize the ultimate and pure nature of reality, known as the fruit of Mahamudra. To be able to see the pure and natural state of reality, free from all notions of objects and the consciousness that perceives them, is the Mahamudra vision. To meditate on the meaning of this vision without mental dispersion is Mahamudra meditation. To be completely free from any notion of what to do or who is doing it is Mahamudra activity. To be completely free from any notion of what to meditate on or who meditates without expectation or worry is the Mahamudra result. If you have realized with direct perception that there is no difference between the one meditating and the object of meditation, this is cognition. Therefore, having differentiated between what is a cognition and what is an assumption, place yourself in a state in which you are not obsessed with assumptions or temporary experiences, not considering them superior. Mahamudra is the conjunction of appearance and emptiness, ecstasy and emptiness, consciousness and emptiness, clarity and emptiness, free from all extremes of fabricated mental categories, i.e., the truly existent, the totally non-existent, both or neither. This cannot be shown by a teacher, understood intellectually by a disciple, or explained in words. It is completely free from notions of this or that. It is a great blessing that can be experienced, but it cannot be identified as anything in particular. There is nothing that is not imbued by it, whether appearances, existence, the everyday, or nirvana. It is the great state beyond the intellect. Mahamudra meditation is a system of deep self-knowledge, and its teaching is highly sophisticated. Although in the previous section the basics of this technique were given, I feel it necessary to offer a more extensive translation of the quoted text to enable the interested reader to practice it with greater understanding. Here it is. Mind is a pristine clarity that cannot be identified. Although it has no intrinsically existent nature, it allows the appearance of clear images. The fundamental characteristic of mind is that, by nature, it is clear and empty awareness. It is pristine and alert without interruption. This is the nature of mind. When you recognize it, always cultivate it without hesitation. The benefits that arise from this are beyond imagination. Observe the sound of your own voice and that of another person, and so on. Likewise, observe a fragrant odor appearing as an object to the consciousness of your nose, and a foul odor. Observe a delicious taste and an unpleasant taste on your tongue, a pleasant and an unpleasant sensation, a hot and a cold sensation, and a physical sensation of intense pain in your body. Observe whatever arises. At such a moment, does the appearance disappear as it ceases to exist? When reflecting an appearance, are the mind and the appearance two independent things? Does the appearance enter the mind from outside, or is it that when the mind reflects something, it goes out and takes on an appearance, thinking, "Am I going to reflect it?" Actually, mind and appearances are inseparable, like a magic mirror and the images it contains. There is only the glare of an appearance and emptiness with no object that truly exists. Observe the contemplating consciousness and its 5 types of sensory objects, one by one in succession. First the sights, then sounds, smells, tastes, and tactile sensations. Observe to see if there is any difference between the consciousness and the appearance of its sense objects, and then look for the difference between an appearance that is the object of a consciousness and the consciousness that has it as its object. Having observed an object, is the object something outside, solid and authentic? If you say no, then it seems that there is no difference between an object on the one hand and the mind on the other, which can clearly observe this object without any obstruction, but which is calm, holds nothing as its object, and in which nothing appears clearly. If you say that it is impossible to think that there is no difference between the mind and the object, but you consider rather that the object is something that exists outside, solid and authentic, then what about the thought that thinks thus? Is its object to be found out there? Consider. Also, observe to see if the body and the mind are the same or if they are different. If they are the same, or one and the same thing, then the body, which is something that arises and ceases, and the mind, which is something permanent by its nature, without any beginning or end, would have to be the same. And if they are different, then you should be able to identify 2 distinct things, body and mind, totally separate from each other. But the mind is not something you can locate with any precision. It is not just in the upper part of your body, or in the lower part of your body, but permeates it completely. The fact that you can experience sensations all over the place, why is that? The body and mind are likened to something that holds and the thing that is held, like a cup and the tea inside. But if you say that the body is outside and the mind is inside, like 2 different things, like a man and his clothes, then in experiencing sensations, if you think that it is only the body that has sensations, then a corpse would also have to have sensations. If you say that only the mind has sensations, then the body and the mind would have to be different and unrelated. Now the mind is something that cannot be killed or affected in any way. If when the body is stung by a thorn your mind feels it, then how is it any different from the example of when you burn the clothes worn by some person, you burn the person wearing them as well? When you sting the body, do you sting the mind as well? After considering this thoroughly, you have to come to a firm decision. In connection with the above, you also have to realize that whatever feeling arises is like a wave, and your mind is like water. because when your mind realizes this, you penetrate this state and come to the meaning of the true nature of reality. You have to observe the mind in this way. Calm your mind until you reach a state of pure clarity and emptiness and observe its nature. Then have a thought arise and observe its nature. Observe to see if the nature of these two, the still mind and the moving mind, are the same, or if they are different. After observing, if you see that they are different, then how are they different? Do the still mind and the moving mind appear alternately as when you have strung threads around two sticks and twist them together to make a rope? Is the still mind like a field, and the moving mind arises like the crops that grow there? Or are they both the same, like a snake or rope and its rings or needles, in the sense that there cannot be a needle without a rope? If so, then when the mind is still without any thought arising, does it move as well? And when it moves, is it still as well? There is a great difference between the mind in motion, which can create anything and make fantasies of an infinite variety, and the still mind which remains motionless. But if you think the two are different in nature, then is the difference in terms of color, form, and so on? Is it in terms of beginning, duration, and end, or past, present, and future, or permanence and non-permanence? Consider in what way they are different. When you know through meditation what thoughts really are, then you realize that the nature of both the still mind and the moving mind is exactly the same. The way they arise is by alteration, and when it is still, there is nothing moving, and when it is moving, there is nothing still. Like water and waves, it is only the mind that functions and acts. It is simply that. When you understand that the still mind and the moving mind are nothing but bright, clear emptiness, then you have some understanding. Dzogchen Meditation. According to Namkhai Norbu, c. The Cycle of Day and Night, Zhang Editions, California, 1984, in the Buddhist tradition of Tibet, Garab Dorje was the first human master of the Dzogchen system of contemplative practice. The term Dzogchen translates as the Great Perfection, and the system has been passed down from master to disciple to the present day. Dzogchen attempts to understand, in the immediate experience of the meditator, the primordial state and unconditioned nature of the mind. The mind, as in Mahamudra, is seen as possessing a pure, self-reflective luminosity, as a kind of mirror reflecting different manifestations. The meditator of the Dzogchen technique uses any experience to identify this mirror that reflects it, not identifying himself with the reflections but with their origin. It is not, as in Vipassana Meditation, to observe the experience from the perspective of the observer, but to grasp the difference between the experience as the product of a process of creation and the source of that process. The meditator contacts that source by attending to its origin. The simile of the mirror and its reflections constitutes an appropriate image to understand the technique, although it does not replace the experience of it. In this experience, the meditator must pay attention to the first moment of sensitive activation before any stimulus. In this first moment of consciousness is the origin of the conscious being, or the mirror surface of the mind. Any stimulus is reflected in this surface, and what is involved is to be conscious of the existence of the reflecting surface, independently of the characteristics or the contents of its reflections. One way of approaching the Dzogchen experience is to attend to the first experience that occurs at the moment of awakening from sleep. There is a recognizable sequence of events that follow one another during awakening, from the immediate experience without ego or self, the remembrance of oneself as having a self, to the full awakening in which the mind begins its usual dialogue. The meditator possesses in the first step of this sequence the possibility of experiencing his mind free of contents and in the absence of identities. Another way to experience the state of Dzogchen is to observe the contents of visual perception, objects, colors, forms, etc., without assigning them verbal or intellectual denominators. that is, without connecting them with the rational process of identification and signification. In the naked perception prior to conceptualization, it is possible to experience the purity of mind. Dzogchen meditation can be better understood after reading the following excerpts from the book, The Cycle of Day and Night. The awareness that arises in the first sudden instant of sensory contact is truly that pure presence which appears without correction or modification, and which is not created by causes. This condition of both subject and object is the authentic and self-originated primordial consciousness of pure presence. Text quoted. This consciousness, in its birth, is totally absent of dualistic thoughts that conceive of things in terms of subject and object, and therefore external appearances arise as manifestations of clarity without attachment towards conceptions or judgments. Appearances then present themselves in the state of the real condition of existence. Text quoted. In the early morning, immediately after awakening, a primordial consciousness arises, which is uncorrected and remains present in its own condition. If we remain in this natural state without distraction and without meditating on anything, then we will find ourselves quietly present, undisturbed by any discursive thought. Text quoted. Taking a comfortable posture and being relaxed both internally and externally, without being agitated in any way, one integrates one's consciousness with the open sky in front of one. When one looks at the sky, it would seem that the sense of self disappears in the openness of the sky. This openness is integrated into one's feeling, and one continues in this way. The mind is simply present in pure attention at the moment of observation. Text quoted. When one places oneself in this condition in a state of relaxed alertness without distractions, and without a constructed meditation, this initial awareness, which is like heaven, is also a condition in which one has no attachments or fixations on conceptions or judgments. With regard to integration with space, there is nothing to do with the mind, nothing to visualize or recite. One is not thinking about something. What is present is pure attention. This consciousness that is present there is like the sky and has nothing in it in relation to a mental creation or attachment. It is the simple and pure presence of clarity, and one abides in it. Text quoted. Hindu meditation. The classical Hindu meditation is described in the Yoga aphorisms of Patanjali. Patanjali was a great sage and systematizer whose greatest contribution was to synthesize the yoga system using a style of writing in which knowledge is concentrated in brief phrases of high conceptual and abstract power. In the chapter on meditation, Patanjali describes the samyama technique, which consists of 3 steps or phases applicable to any object of meditation. The system proposes that meditation should be performed in a sequence in which the first objects are of high density, progressing to meditation through increasingly subtle objects, until the last one is Purusha or the Self. The 3 steps of Samyama. Fixation of attention on an object. Maintenance of the observation on the object until it completely occupies the entire field of consciousness, to the exclusion of any other object. Fusion with the object, in which the object ceases to be perceived as an object and instead appears in its meaning. A first object of meditation can be, for example, a flower. The meditator attends to the flower, observing it in a concentrated way until its last details. The meditator keeps the observation concentrated on the flower until the flower occupies his entire consciousness. Finally, he merges with the flower, becoming it and thus understanding its meaning. The method of samyama is a technique of direct knowledge, since with its use the meditator knows the object of his observation in its essence or interior. Once mastery has been acquired in the application of samyama to concrete objects, the meditator chooses, as a motif of observation, more subtle objects, such as space. In meditating on space, the same three-step sequence of samyama is followed as in the observation of the flower. That is, first the attention is fixed on space to the exclusion of any object contained therein. Further on, the attention is kept fixed on space until it occupies the entire field of consciousness. Finally, the meditator merges with space, becoming it, and there space appears in its essential meaning. Samyama can be used to gain direct knowledge of any living being, entity, or object one chooses to observe. When the observation of Purusha is reached, the meditator applies the three steps of samyama in meditation on the self, the pure self, or his real identity, and in this exercise attains direct knowledge of his own essence. The fusion between observer and object of observation makes the dichotomy between external and internal, subject and object or I and you disappear, and instead reaches the unity between the two. In Hindu yoga, a fundamental importance is given to the attainment of silence. According to Patanjali himself, yoga is the union of the individual self with the unified self in totality. It could also be defined as the union of the individual soul with the universal soul. For this to be possible, it is necessary to quiet the fluctuations of the mind until they are silenced. The mind, as a participant in the perception of reality, distorts reality when it is not silent, that is, when memory is active and conditioned thought confuses reality with a personal interpretation of it. In other words, mental activity, according to Patanjali, is a kind of filter or obstructive screen that shades with its own texture and color reality. Only when the screen and filters disappear, a union takes place in which reality perceives itself. In this way, meditation will consist of any procedure that succeeds in quieting the mind, in putting an end to its fluctuations in order to determine an inhibition in the processes of distortion. There are a large number of techniques drawn from the Hindu tradition, some of which, such as samyama on the self, go directly to the source of enlightenment, while others use intermediary processes. For example, a technique used by a centenarian Indian yogi, Yogi Yogeshwar, consists of raising the energy from the base of the spine to the space between the eyebrows with the help of the breath. To do this, the meditator, sitting or standing, attends to the base of his spine and during inhalation visualizes his own energy ascending through it to the space between the eyebrows, from which it exits during exhalation. In the ashram of this yogi, much importance is given to meditation on the generators or body chakras. These are in number of 7 and are located 1. In the genital area, 2. At the level of the navel, 3. In the plexus, 4. In the heart, 5. In the throat, 6. Between the eyebrows, and 7. In the crown, in the highest part of the head. The filters of reality become more transparent as one ascends from generator to generator. Therefore, one of the most recommended practices of Raja Yoga, or real yoga, is the maintenance of attention by concentrating it on the higher chakras. According to Yogi Yogeshwar, concentration on the generator between the eyebrows, when done properly, activates the appearance of an intense light that brightens and expands as concentration progresses. Meditation on this divine light activates states of ecstasy and allows one to experience various extraordinary sensations. Meditation with the heart chakra activates and strengthens the capacity for love and compassion, while concentration on the crown generator leads the practitioner to the goal of yoga, which is personal union with God. Meditation of the Brahma Kumaris. The Brahma Kumaris are part of a spiritual movement originating in India that uses a meditation technique that falls within the tradition of Raja Yoga or real yoga. According to the Brahma Kumaris, the human being has a dual nature. On the one hand, he possesses an organic body that lives a temporary life, and on the other hand, an immortal soul that incarnates in the body, but which survives it at its death. The soul has a location, and this is the region between the eyebrows, in the Raja Yoga meditation of the Brahma Kumaris. The meditator must remember himself as soul, concentrating his attention precisely on his location between the eyebrows. This experience brings the meditator into contact with his true nature in soul consciousness and not in the body. Meditation is usually done in pairs. Each partner observes the space between the eyebrows of the other, remembering himself in soul consciousness and feeling his partner also in soul consciousness while observing his space between the eyebrows. The meditation is accompanied by soft, soothing music and is performed in periods of approximately 20 minutes. The Brahma Kumaris also meditate in a group, choosing one of them as the center of attention, so that all concentrate on the space between the eyebrows of this person, visualizing it in soul consciousness, while the latter observes the space between the eyebrows of each member of the group in turn, and also remembering it in soul consciousness. Life for the Brahma Kumaris is a kind of theatrical stage on which each of us plays a role in the drama of existence. The wisdom is not to confuse the drama with reality, but to maintain the awareness that it is a performance. Below, I reproduce a writing of the Brahma Kumaris in which the above is described, and a method of meditation for daily life is proposed. A world of true heroes. The true hero. The true hero sees life as a play and intensely experiences every scene and every moment. He is a character who takes every scene he experiences as a profoundly human teaching and transforms his world day by day, improving his attitude towards himself and others more and more. Being aware of being a character in the theater of life, he chooses to play his role in such a way that he always moves forward as a human being. On stage, the true hero locates the battlefield within himself. He knows that his transformation is the transformation of the world around him. The battlefield. The battlefield of the true hero is everyday life. The true hero enters the stage armed with the powers of his thoughts and adorned with the jewels of his virtues. His enemies are not the characters on the stage, but the obstacles he creates in his mind or by acting without a true conscience. The true victory. The true victory for the true hero is to maintain the precise attitude to progress in his transformation. Victory is also to maintain the attitude that makes him aware of his authentic identity, with the role he wishes to play in life. The true hero lives victory with humility. He does not boast about his triumphs, but lives them with an inner satisfaction that makes him feel complete. True victory is not, for example, winning an argument, but transforming an atmosphere of friction into an atmosphere of serenity and harmony. And so, the battlefield being the scenes of daily life, the true hero always sees these scenes as tests to be faced, which make him stronger and make him progress. The true hero always experiences victory in defeat and victory in victory. He inspires courage in others. A victor does not make anyone feel lesser, because a true victorious hero is a gladiator, someone who lifts others up. The true enemies. The true hero never sees the other characters as enemies, but sees in everyone the possibility of them also becoming heroes along with him. The real enemies he faces in battle are his own habits or negative personality traits. He knows that these were formed by constantly repeating them in his past actions, and that they have become integrated into his personality, like an indentation in the earth that becomes deeper and deeper with the continuous passing of water. The true hero, aware of this, modifies his conduct so as not to deepen the indentation of his enemies, but that of his qualities and virtues. The true hero is sovereign of himself, of his thoughts, words, and actions. Thus he transforms. worry into optimism, envy into satisfaction with oneself and with respect to others, perishable pleasures into humanitarian and spiritual experiences, attachment or dependence into true love, lack of love for oneself into self-respect, ego into humility. The 8 powers. The 8 powers are the weapons of the true hero. The 8 powers are attitudes and thoughts that help the true hero to play his role in the play accurately. 1. Introspection. I become the true hero when I have the ability to act on stage and, at the same time, observe the scene. For this, I need to enter into a state of introspection, to be in the essence of my being, in my true identity, and thus identify my body as the costume of the character I am playing. The power of introspection is the ability to enter the place where I am me, where I am authentically me, and not what others want me to be. In this place, I am at ease with myself. I enjoy my own company, because the deeper I go into my being, the more I discover and experience my original qualities of peace, love, purity, energy, and calm. These qualities were mixed and contaminated with other feelings as I let myself be manipulated by the scenes of daily life. When I reunite with my being and its original qualities, I control the situations, and they no longer manipulate me. I observe the scenes from my deepest self, and thus decide to play the best role on the stage, that of the true hero who achieves true victories. The power of introspection is the basis for applying the other powers. 2. Put a period. The past is the past. The true hero lives the present with great intensity, does not wear himself out thinking about his past failures, nor does he rest on the laurels of his past victories. He continues to grow day by day. He is open to the new. Every day he allows himself to be new, and allows the other characters on the stage to be someone who can be transformed at every moment. I'll go to the essence and let what I deeply am blossom. Thus, from self-respect, respect for others arises. Without the ballast of the past, there shines in my life the optimism to start life every day, the enthusiasm to live my present and build my future. I have the capacity for transformation in myself, and consequently in others. The true hero puts an end also to useless thoughts. Useless thoughts are those that weaken the being, and prevent him from seeing reality as it is. They are the thoughts that produce negativity and suffering. The true hero develops the habit of generating only creative, productive, and positive thoughts. He does not occupy himself with thinking about the role that others play or should play, but rather he occupies himself with his own role. 3. Tolerance. The power of tolerance does not function as an oppositional force, but as an inner force born of combining the other powers with introspection. The true hero understands how others experience the scene. He is flexible with the variety of roles of the other characters. With the power to put an end to the past, he lets the other character be someone new at any time. The true hero is able to reconcile the onstage character's force of extroversion with his own force of introspection, which is powerful enough to end the battle, in which both emerge triumphant. In this way, he enjoys the transformation that takes place in the sequence of scenes as the master of his performance. The true hero knows that he has to tolerate not just once, but many times. The fruit of his tolerance is eternal and sweet, and the others will definitely change. Tolerance is not repressing or holding back, but it is a state that arises from feeling complete and satisfied with himself, which allows him to give others the fruits of his state. When you receive a stone, you give a fruit in return. Tolerance means to fill oneself with power and to give power to others. The true hero applies tolerance in his attitude towards others, and also in difficult circumstances. Reducing expansion to its essence is what is called tolerance. Enlarging the obstacles in the mind means creating a mountain. The true hero reduces, not expands. He reduces obstacles to their essence. Essence is to take the path with shortcuts. Thus he saves time, is constantly cheerful, never loses hope, never becomes disheartened. 4. Discriminate. To be an actor on the scene and at the same time a detached observer is a tactic of the true hero. To be able to discriminate. It is like a jeweler who discriminates the real diamonds from the fake ones. To discriminate is to be able to distinguish between what is superficial, trivial, and what is deeply human or spiritual, between the temporal and the eternal, between the false and the authentic, between the real and the illusion. 5. To judge. The true hero puts in the balance the power to judge the perception he had, along with the power to discriminate. He judges while being stable in the state of self-respect, humility, and detachment. He judges based on the knowledge of the three tenses. To the past, he puts a period after having learned the lesson. In the present, he discriminates and judges by envisioning the positive consequences of his actions in the future. The true hero sees the adversities of battle as temporary without losing his state of stability. A true hero never creates dependencies and therefore discriminates and judges freely. His intellect is clear, without useless thoughts. 6. Adjust. As the ocean submerges all that flows into it, so I submerge all that passes. The true hero knows when to use the power to adjust and when to use the power to cope. In deciding whether to adjust or cope, he uses the powers of discriminating and judging first. The true hero is prepared to act in any scene of daily life. He knows that scenes may present themselves differently from what he expected. He knows all the elements that make up every scene in the theater of life, from the details of the setting to the more subtle attitudes of the other characters. With this knowledge, he places himself as a character outside the scene, reconsiders the role he is going to play, and plays it in harmony. 7. Coping. If his decision is to confront, he has determined thoughts. I confront when I assume the situation as it is and act. I cope when I accept my role as a true hero and enter the battle certain of true victory. The true hero faces new situations or situations in which he is already involved. In both, he relies on his power of introspection and his knowledge of the theater of life. He knows that the first step to transformation is realization. 8. Cooperation. Cooperation is the future of the other powers. When there is cooperation, there is the strength to achieve what seemed impossible. To share the task is to facilitate it. The performance of the true hero motivates others to cooperate. Each character in the world is unique, and his or her cooperation is also unique. Therefore, the cooperation of each and every human being is necessary for the creation of a better world. Olmec Meditation. As described in the introduction, the Olmec were a highly developed people who believed that the true meaning of existence is to participate in the development and maintenance of the cosmic order. There is evidence to indicate that the Olmec developed meditative systems whose instructions are engraved on the large stone statues they carved. Possibly, they were the originators of shamanism in Mexico, whose representatives still exist. Olmec meditation involves a very interesting body management, which has a vitalizing effect, rejuvenating and maintaining an optimal state of health. In fact, it is said that if Olmec meditation is practiced constantly for 5 years, its effect is to maintain in a permanent way youth. To practice Olmec meditation, the sitting posture is used with the back straight. The meditator begins by fixing his attention on his body, concentrating first on his spine. He visualizes the spine and imagines a light or energy rotating around the spine in a counterclockwise direction, i.e., to the left. This spinning is done along the spine from its base to its insertion into the skull. The twist is made around the spine from top to bottom and from bottom to top, until it extends the entire length of the spine. As the outward twisting is continued, an attempt is made to penetrate the spine by turning it to the left, but inside, if the meditator is successful, he will soon notice that his entire spine manifests a sustained leftward twist along its entire length and extent. When this is accomplished, then attention is fixed on the brain, also turning it to the left. The brain turn is initiated with a strategy similar to that used with the spinal column. That is, first the meditator visualizes a light or energy surrounding the brain turning to the left, and little by little makes the turn penetrate the interior of the brain mass until he achieves that all of it, in each of its parts, turns to the left. Later, and using a similar procedure, each organ of the body is attended to: heart, lungs, stomach, intestines, genital organs, etc., and they are made to turn to the left. Finally, the rotation is extended to the legs, arms, thorax, and in general to the whole body. There is no time limit for maintaining the left turn, and it is recommended to continue it throughout the day without interruptions. If this is not possible, then 2 turning periods of 20 minutes each will be sufficient to begin to feel the benefits derived from this practice. Shamanic Meditation. There are a large number of meditation techniques used by Mexican shamans. Each lineage of shamans practices specific techniques that have their origin in remote periods. Mexican shamans use these techniques to purify themselves and prepare for their healing work or for their work as native psychologists. Some of these meditation techniques as used by the shamans referred to in the text are explained below. Meditation Techniques of Don Lucio de Morelos. Don Lucio considers that his power as a shaman comes from what he calls the invisible world, inhabited by the workers of time, the herds and the paslers. Don Lucio's meditation techniques are designed precisely to establish contact with this invisible world and its inhabitants. One of the techniques is the establishment of a contact with nature and the relaxation in this contact. Don Lucio chooses a place in the countryside, preferably free of sound interference and away from human interaction, and in this place, for example, under a tree, he lies down and relaxes, leaving his mind free, without obstructing his processes, without repressing or guiding them. In his words, leaving his spirit free to do and conduct his spiritual business. Another of this shaman's meditation techniques consists of paying attention to internal sounds and listening to the messages of the time workers who, according to Don Lucio, communicate with him directly. Meditation Techniques of Doña Pachita. Doña Pachita, one of the most extraordinary shamanesses of contemporary Mexico, performed true feats of healing, handling space-time, energy and matter, and claimed to use a series of procedures that allowed her to perform her work. Doña Pachita's main meditation procedure consisted of sitting on a chair in front of her altar in the room where she performed her operations and healings, and once there closing her eyes and breathing softly until she could hear a characteristic buzzing sound in one of her ears. Once she caught this buzzing sound, which, according to Doña Pachita, was the manifestation of a change of state in herself, she would listen to this internal sound until she felt that she fell into a kind of big hole, after which she would change her state. Doña Pachita would meditate on characteristic sound sensations and then let herself go in an act she described as a leap into the void or a sudden descent on a wheel of fortune, after which she would begin her surgical operations. The technique reminds me of a Hindu meditation procedure called Shabd, in which the meditator must pay attention to a characteristic humming sound and follow this humming sound for a relatively long period of time. Don Panchito's meditation techniques. Don Panchito, one of the most veteran shamans of the Mexican Republic, was of Mayan origin and lived in a small town in the center of the Yucatan Peninsula. Don Panchito used at least 3 meditation techniques. The first one was an attentive observation of daily natural phenomena. I am referring to the observation of the sunrise, the sunset, the movements of animals, his own internal processes, the changes of light, the movements of his hammock as he rocked in it, and so on. Don Panchito was capable of maintaining his observation for hours, paying attention to the smallest details. The second meditation technique Don Panchito used was the attentive observation of the stars at night. For approximately 15 minutes, he would choose some area of the starry firmament and fix his attention on this area in a relaxed posture, allowing the stellar information to penetrate inside him. Then, Don Panchito would go to sleep, and in the morning he would collect his dreams, and through their content, he could observe his own processes and was able to use this information to offer it to a patient. In fact, the technique of stellar observation with the subsequent analysis of the dream contents was used by Don Panchito when a patient came to consult him and specifically asked him for an act of divination of his future. Don Panchito's third meditation technique consisted of what he called talking directly to God. The only thing I can mention about this technique is that Don Panchito emphasized that the subject of the development should learn to establish a direct dialogue with God and maintain this dialogue without intermediaries. Meditation techniques of Don Gaudencio. Don Gaudencio is a descendant of the Tepanec Indians. He uses 2 meditation techniques which, unlike the previous shamans, are active techniques. The first of these techniques is what we might call the power passing technique. This is used by the Tepanec Indians to acquire greater energy and power, and with it to interact more adequately during their healing processes. It consists of walking with the legs slightly bent, the chest open and in a forward position in a kind of mimicry of what could be the walk of a gorilla. This step of power is maintained for a considerable time without interruption, and according to Don Gaudencio, causes an energetic increase. The second technique, also of Tepaneca origin, consists of slowly turning the head in a horizontal direction from left to right and then from right to left. The turns are made by pressing the chin against the chest during the slow turn. According to Don Gaudencio, the Tepanec Indians managed to keep this meditation technique active for 8 uninterrupted hours, concentrating totally on the slow turning, thus producing an increase in the capacity of attention and its focalization. Carlos Castaneda's meditation techniques. This contemporary shaman, disciple of Don Juan Matus of Sonora, uses an indeterminate amount of meditation techniques, of which it is only possible for me to speak of 2 of them. One technique very similar to that described above of the Tepanec Indians consists of slowly turning the head also from right to left and from left to right, with one addition. During the movement, they imagine scenes involving other people with whom they have interacted, and during the turning, and when inhaling, they collect the elements of their own presence that they feel they have left scattered in the people with whom they interacted, and during the exhalation they return to these same people the energetic elements that they have taken from them. The technique allows the recovery of personal energy without interference or crossover with the energy of other people. From a psychoanalytical point of view, one could explain this technique as a recovery of the transferable and counter-transferable processes of the shaman. In other words, it is a technique that allows to elaborate the interactions of the past and to clean them of energetic and emotional charges. In this sense, another of the meditation techniques used by Carlos Castaneda consists of going through the memory in a sequential way, from the present moment backwards, elaborating the processes of interaction through this inhalation and exhalation and turning of the head in order to re-establish the present and erase the personal history and the series of conditioning and associations that have been internalized. One of the main ideas and objectives of these techniques is the achievement of an inner silence. In other words, a state in which there is no internal dialogue, in order to be able to interact with reality in the present and with total fluidity. Meditation techniques of Juan Diego. Juan Diego uses a very interesting meditation technique, which consists of sitting motionless as the first act of the morning after waking up and remaining in this position for 2 hours, allowing his ego to fade little by little, and instead his body to be impregnated with the energy of the environment. In Juan Diego's own words, his technique consists of allowing the energy of the self to replace his own, bathing him in it totally. According to Juan Diego, in this way he acquires enough strength to be able to alleviate the ailments of the patients who come to him for help. Meditation techniques of Doña Josefina. Doña Josefina could be considered a veteran shaman who is dedicated to healing in the city of Oaxaca and who uses an extraordinarily sophisticated meditation technique that I will try to describe below. Doña Josefina claims that she can remain conscious throughout the night by observing her own processes and stimulating what she calls out-of-body journeys. Doña Josefina uses these trips to establish contact with her patients, regardless of their distance, and above all, to travel to a place she claims to be located in Japan, and in this place, to establish an interaction with the inhabitants who, according to her, live there. Doña Josefina affirms that it is enough for her to visit this place to regain strength and to be able to work all day long in her therapeutic processes, without the need to sleep at night. Conclusions. It is necessary to clarify that this review of the meditation techniques of the Mexican shamans is by no means exhaustive, nor could it be considered a final or total analysis of the techniques they use. Rather, it has been a partial review that, as more information is obtained, may be enriched in future works. For now, it is possible to affirm that in general, Mexican shamans use two large families of meditation techniques. On the one hand, what could be called active techniques, such as the passage of power, the revolving movements of the head, and on the other hand, techniques that do not involve movements, and therefore could be called passive, such as those used by Don Panchito in his observations of nature and in his fixation of attention on the stars. The levels of complexity of meditation techniques vary from shaman to shaman, from the very concrete to the very abstract, from those involving specific movements, as in the case of Don Gaudencio, to those involving the establishment of the mind, to those involving the establishment of the mind. Taoist laughter meditation. There is no doubt about the benefits of laughter on personal health, mood, and attitude towards life. When we laugh, we activate the secretion of beneficial hormonal substances for the organism, and in the social order, we lighten our personal relationships of the tensions and emotional burdens that sometimes exist between us. The Taoist laughter meditation has an immediate beneficial effect that anyone who practices it will notice from the first time they use it. Sitting with eyes closed and in a relaxed posture, the meditator visualizes in front of his or her brow, as if floating in space, the smiling face of a loved one. She feels the joyful energy of that person, and little by little, introduces it between her eyebrows through a spiral that she visualizes between the imagined face and her own head. After doing the above, smile by raising the corners of your lips and eyes. The effect of smiling by raising the corners of the lips and eyes is an immediate feeling of joy. Next, the meditator feels his throat, visualizes it, and sends him the same joy that he activated by smiling. In other words, he smiles at his own throat, filling it with joy and gratitude for the work he is doing. He performs the same operation with his heart. He feels his own heart, visualizes it, and smiles at it, filling it with joy and thanking it for its work. Later, he repeats the same thing, smiling at his lungs, liver, spleen, pancreas, and genital organs. Once he has finished going through his internal organs, he visualizes again the smiling face of the loved one in front of his brow and introduces his joyful energy through it. He then collects the saliva he has secreted into his mouth and swallows it, following its path through the digestive system. As he accompanies the saliva, he smiles at all the internal parts through which it passes: his throat, esophagus, and digestive tract. When it reaches the stomach, it smiles at it, filling it with joy and thanking it for its work. Then he continues smiling to his small intestine, to finish visualizing and feeling his large intestine, smiling to it until its terminal point in the anus. Once this journey through your digestive system is completed, visualize again the smiling face of the loved one in front of your brow, and introduce the energy of joy to it, through the spiral that you have activated on previous occasions. He makes this smiling energy penetrate into the interior of his brain until it reaches the central portion of the brain, in the area of the cerebral ventricles. Visualize the interior of the ventricles as if they were a cavern filled with a crystalline liquid. He imagines himself inside a palace of crystals and smiles at its contents and walls. From this crystal palace, he directs his smile to the back of his brain, smiling at his occipital lobe. He does the same with your frontal lobe in the front part of your brain and with the two cerebral hemispheres, right and left, filling them with the joy of smiling. Once he has smiled at his whole brain, he visualizes his cerebellum and smiles at it, and then does the same with the base of his brain and the whole of his spinal cord. The meditation ends when the meditator manages to fill his whole body with the energy of his smile, including in this operation his legs, arms, thorax, head, as well as all the internal organs described above. For a few minutes, he maintains the joy in his whole body, filling each of its parts. All this meditation is done while maintaining the expression of smile, given by the elevation of the corners of the lips and eyes. Meditation by Ramana Maharshi, Sri Nisargadatta Maharaj. Two of the greatest meditators of contemporary India were Ramana Maharshi and Sri Nisargadatta Maharaj, both of whom used a very similar meditation technique. This technique consists of serious inquiry into one's true identity. The meditator asks himself the question, "Who am I?" and is introduced into its meaning. The question is carried out by searching within himself for an answer to it. He lets his system search for this answer, and if he is not satisfied with it, he asks himself the same question again as many times as necessary. The following text, written by Ramana Maharshi, gives an account of the ideas of this meditator. Who am I? To realize the inherent and pure happiness, the happiness which is your real nature, the inquiry into who am I, in the search for self, is the best way. Who am I? I am not this physical body, nor am I the 5 organs of sense perception. I am not the 5 organs of external activity, nor the 5 vital forces, nor am I even the thinking mind. I am not even the unconscious state which remains after the activity of the organs of perception and even the mind have ceased their activity, when I am no longer aware of the existence of the objects of perception, therefore, rejecting all the above-mentioned functions and physical aids by saying, I am neither this nor that nor even that. What remains, separate and alone by itself, that pure consciousness is what I truly am. This consciousness is by its very nature, existence consciousness gozo. If the mind, which is the instrument of knowledge and the basis of all activity, disappears, the perception of the world as an objective reality ceases. For the vision of the real nature of the self to be obtained, the illusory nature of the perception of the world must cease. Investigating what remains after eliminating all thoughts, one realizes that there is no such thing as mind separate from thought. Thus, thoughts are the mind. nor is there such a thing as the physical world separate or independent of thoughts. Just as the spider secretes the threads of its web from itself and then absorbs them, so the mind projects the world from itself and absorbs it back into itself. The world is perceived with an apparent objective reality when the mind externalizes, confusing its identity with that of the self. When the world is viewed in this way, the real nature of the self is not revealed. Conversely, when the self is realized, the world ceases to exist as an objective reality. By constant and continuous inquiry into the nature of the mind is transformed into that to which the self refers, and that in reality is the self. The mind needs to depend on something gross for its existence. It never survives on its own. That which arises in the physical body as the self is the mind. The first and most apparent of all thoughts arising in the mind is the primordial thought of self. It is only after the birth of the thought of self that other thoughts appear. In other words, only after the self appears do the thou and he appear in the mind. They could not persist if the first thought did not arise. Since all other thoughts appear only after the thought of self, and since the mind is only a jumble of thoughts, it is only through the inquiry, "Who am I?" that the mind ceases. Moreover, the integral thought of the self involved in such an inquiry, having destroyed all other thoughts, finally also vanishes or consumes. Even when strange thoughts appear during the above investigation, do not be interested in completing the thought, but instead, ask deep within yourself, to whom did this thought appear? No matter how many thoughts appear, if you only ask immediately and alertly, to whom did the thought appear, you will always find myself. If you then ask, who am I? The mind will introvert and the thought ceases. If in this way you persevere more and more in the practice of self-inquiry, the mind acquires greater power to dwell at its source. In this way, the mind becomes absorbed in the heart, and the ego, or self, which is the center of all thoughts, finally vanishes, and the self or pure consciousness, which subsists in all states of mind, remains alone and resplendent. It is this state in which no trace of the thought self remains, that appears as one's true self. This is called silence and stillness. This state of pure inherence in the pure self is known as the vision of wisdom. It implies and signifies the total surrender of the mind to the self. Nothing outside of this, including all psychic powers of the mind, are wisdom. For stillness and silence of mind, there is no more effective and permanent means than self-inquiry into the who am I. That which is bliss is also the self. The existing and the self are not distinct or separate but are the same and one thing, and that alone is the real. In none of the objects that make up the world is bliss to be found. It is only ignorance that claims that happiness is in the objects. On the contrary, when the mind externalizes, it suffers pain and anguish. The truth is that whenever our desires are satisfied and we feel happiness, it is because the mind, returning to its origin, experiences the happiness that is inherent and natural to the self. Text quoted. Let us now say the words of Sri Nisargadatta Maharaj taken from the book Self. Before leaving his body, my guru said to me, "Trust me, you yourself are the absolute, the highest state. Do not doubt these words. Have faith in this revelation. It is only the expression of truth. Embrace it accordingly. In principle, one must feel this sense of the I Am. You have to adore this presence in the I Am, enjoy it, have it for a friend. You have to identify yourself with it, and then, spontaneously, this thought will arise in it. I am not what I am. If, after having listened to my words, you dedicate yourself solely and exclusively to this, meditate. Meditate much on the intimate knowledge of I am. I am means only the manifestation set, not the psychosomatic body ideas set that bears its name. Reject your identification with that body ideas set and become aware of the I am. Simply, without specifications. This is the initial stage. I am this dynamic consciousness of the manifested, but do not formulate it in words, not even within yourself. The real means the ultimate and the first state. It is the most ancient, primordial, eternal, absolute state. Above it has appeared the illusory state, like a covering, like a cloud, like a stain. It is this appearance to which the sensation of the I Am has been attached, its events, its constant need to come and go. This illusory state must necessarily disappear, like a cloud without dissipation. As long as this cloud remains undissipated, the primordial state will not appear. The primordial state does not have to be conquered, since we have it there. All we have to do is to remove the parapet that hides it. You feel, you experience the I Am. But this state of the I Am must be eliminated. It must disappear. Only then will the primordial state be revealed, since upon it the illusory has been formed. Neither you nor I have been born. We live locked up in the idea that our image is the one offered by our body, and our name is only the one our body has. How are we to free ourselves from it? We have to meditate on that principle, on this belief that the true identity is the one that corresponds to the name and the image of the body. If you center your meditation on the conviction of the I Am, if you penetrate fully into this principle, something similar to the germination of a grain will happen to you. The I Am will communicate to you any kind of knowledge you may have. This means that you will become this knowledge, and that in the course of that process you will become detached from this knowledge. This means that you transcend this principle, that you discover that I, the Absolute, am not this I Am, this consciousness. You detach yourself from it, you pass to a new state, works-cited. Active meditation. The practice of meditation need not be limited to sitting or immobility. In fact, meditation should accompany every activity of daily life, strengthening it in all its manifestations, from eating, walking, talking, and so on. The meditator is recommended to observe himself during the activity, to maintain his awareness and attention while eating, walking, and talking. None of these activities need to be done in an inattentive or unconscious way. In the Japanese system of Zen, walking is used as a meditation technique called kin-jin. The meditator walks slowly and leisurely, and as he does so, he attends to his movements, the sensations in his legs, his experience of touching the ground with the soles of his feet, and so on. The kin-jin technique is performed in periods of 5 or 10 minutes between 2 periods of sitting meditation. Synergistic Meditation. The synergistic theory is a theoretical approach to perception. According to this theory, what we perceive is the result of a very complex process in which the brain transforms the information contained in space into a visual image of the world. In synergistic meditation, attention is paid precisely to this process of energetic transformation and creation of conscious experience. During the practice of this technique, the meditator observes the visual images of his perception, remembering that what he sees is the final product of a series of transformation processes. Sooner or later, depending on the intensity of his or her attention, the meditator will begin to perceive reality from a new point of view, more as his or her own creation than as a passive reflection of a pre-existing reality. According to the synergistic theory, the same process of creating a visual image is activated to give rise to the perception of spiritual realities. This process involves the creation by the brain of a hypercomplex energy field called the neural field. The neural field interacts with the basic structure of space-time, what physics calls the lattice of space. In this interaction between the neural field and the lattice is the perception of reality. It will depend on how unified the brain activity is for a highly coherent neural field to be created. This highly coherent field is capable of interacting with the areas of the lattice close to its basic or fundamental structure. In this highly coherent interaction lies the secret to perceiving and experiencing levels of reality that transcend the purely sensory, but which, like the sensory, are created through a process of interaction. The meditator who attends to his experience, realizing the process of creating it, places himself in an ideal position to know the foundation of any and all realities. This is precisely the objective of Synergistic Meditation, the recognition of the common origin of any reality in order to achieve the experience of what is fundamental and common to all perceptual acts. Meditation for increasing interhemispheric correlation. It has been known since the time of Pasteur that one of the characteristics of living beings is to possess a right-left asymmetry. Recent neurophysiological discoveries have shown that this asymmetry is also found in the functions of both cerebral hemispheres. The left hemisphere, dominant in right-handed subjects, controls the movements of the right portion of the organism, and the right hemisphere controls those of the left portion. The dominant hemisphere is in charge of verbal language. Interhemispheric asymmetry is also observed for complex functions. For example, the dominant left hemisphere is related to cognitive processing associated with rational and linear logic, while the right hemisphere is in charge of more global and pictorial processing. Intuitive knowledge is processed by the right hemisphere, while knowledge of the logical meaning of language is a function of the left hemisphere. One measure of the relative similarity of interhemispheric processing is the greater or lesser similarity of electroencephalographic activity between the two hemispheres. When the electrical activity of the right hemisphere is similar to that of the left hemisphere, we say that there is a high correlation or coherence between the two hemispheres. On the other hand, when this similarity decreases, interhemispheric coherence is lower. In recent years, measures of coherence or interhemispheric correlation have been associated with psychological functions, and it has been found that, as coherence increases, subjects report feeling more internally integrated, calmer and closer to their self, while subjects with low interhemispheric correlation feel internally disintegrated and distant from their ego center. To increase interhemispheric coherence without the use of sophisticated equipment and with maximum naturalness, we proceed as follows. The tips of the thumb and index fingers of both hands are lightly tapped while saying, silently or aloud, the mantric syllable Sa. The tips of the thumb and middle fingers are tapped while saying Ta. The thumb and ring fingers are tapped while repeating Na. The thumb and little finger are tapped while saying Ma. Repeat the sequence 1 to 4 in an uninterrupted way, increasing the concentration during the sequence until you decide to finish it. This is an active meditation that can be done at any time, while walking, sitting, or even lying down, and has the almost immediate effect of achieving a remarkable increase in interhemispheric coherence. Concentration while walking. The above effect can be increased by associating it with a concentration on the natural steps while walking. To do this, proceed as before, tapping the fingers in the sequence described while repeating the mantras, but now associating them with walking. When walking, one attends with full concentration to the steps, and when moving the right leg, one says Sa with the left leg Ta, etc. And the same sequence is performed again when moving the legs. In this way, each step is coordinated with each mantra of the complete sequence in an act of complex, simultaneous attention. The technique has even greater benefits if attention to the breath is added to the above concentration. Thus, when moving the right leg and taking a step with it, one mantra of the sequence is repeated by tapping the fingers while inhaling and doing the same during exhalation. In this way, 3 activities are combined in an act of simultaneous concentration: the breath, the tapping of the fingers together with the repetition of the mantras, and the left and right steps during normal walking. the rhythm of walking should be adjusted to the time required to repeat the mantras during both an inhalation and an exhalation, and the results of this practice are excellent both for the achievement of increased interhemispheric coherence and for the development of attention and concentration. Electrophysiological meditation techniques. Before concluding, I would like to briefly review some forms of meditation used by contemporary psychophysiology. The purpose of including these techniques is to show how the electrophysiological technology of the late 20th century can be harnessed with an intention of self-knowledge and spiritual exploration. There is no reason not to take advantage of current technological advances and not use them as aids to enlightenment. Before showing these practical possibilities of confluence between science and mysticism, and between technology and self-knowledge, it is necessary to review some concepts and explain certain terms. First of all, the meaning of the electrophysiological activity of the brain can be understood by knowing how an electrophysiological recording of the activity of the nervous system is made. A subject has metal plates, electrodes, placed in contact with the surface of his scalp. Beneath these electrodes, gigantic populations of neurons are active. The activity of these nerve cells manifests itself as changes in electrical potentials. These potentials reflect the brain's encoding and decoding of information. The electrode picks up these changes in the form of electrical fluctuations. Using high-powered, minimally distorting amplification equipment, these changes can be inscribed on a sheet of paper or activated on a television screen, oscilloscope, on which the brain's electrical activity will be seen as oscillating fluctuations. Any change in the mental state of a subject is reflected in some modification in his brain activity and, therefore, in some alteration of these oscillations. For example, a relaxed subject with his eyes closed will manifest regular oscillations of his brain activity with a frequency of between 8 and 12 cycles per second. This band of frequencies is called alpha rhythm and reflects a slow synchronization of the electrical firing of brain neurons. In contrast, an agitated and wide-eyed subject manifests beta activity of higher frequency, 12 cycles and higher, and lower voltage. This activity reflects a non-synchronous firing of neurons in the brain. The first electrophysiological meditation technique involves teaching a subject to modify his own brain rhythms using feedback signals. For example, each time his or her activity wanders away, he or she is presented with a sound with the instruction to increase the duration of the sound. When the subject succeeds, he will enter the alpha rhythm and learn to maintain it. In this way, a subject can be taught to remain relaxed. The above technique has been used very frequently and results in many benefits. The second technique, still at the experimental and laboratory level, consists of showing a subject his own electroencephalographic EEG activity as it occurs. The presentation can be done using a visual system through an oscilloscope, similar to a television screen. The instructions to the subject are to observe his or her own brain activity, relating its fluctuations to internal changes, be they thoughts, emotions, bodily sensations, etc. Experiments we have conducted using this mode of self-observation indicate that, as subjects observe their own brain activity, changes in it, which at first were not recognized as related to internal events, gradually become so, until subjects are able to recognize subtle psychological modifications related to subtle changes in their brain activity. This discovery of relationships notably increases the sensitivity of the subjects, making them able to penetrate more deeply inside themselves, observing what is happening there. It seems to think of this technique as a kind of electrophysiological Vipassana meditation. A third application of electrophysiology in the field of meditation is the feedback of interhemispheric correlation. This technique has only been applied at the experimental level, with remarkable results. Interhemispheric correlation means the degree of similarity in the functioning of both cerebral hemispheres. The higher the correlation, the greater the similarity, to the extent that, at maximum correlation, both hemispheres function in practically the same way. Using electrophysiological recording of the right and left hemispheres, and feeding a specially programmed computer, it has been possible to feed back to subjects, giving them information about the degree of their interhemispheric correlation. The subject receives sounds of different frequencies resulting from the computational processes performed on his own brain activity. High-pitched sounds indicate a low correlation, medium sounds an intermediate correlation, and low-pitched sounds a high correlation. When there is an absence of sounds, it means a maximum interhemispheric correlation. Subjects are instructed to achieve low sounds and, preferably, silence. When they learn to maintain the low sound or silence, this means that they have learned to increase their interhemispheric correlation. What the subjects report to this increase is the achievement of a state of balance, peace, and unity with themselves. These results are in agreement with findings that indicate that great meditators maintain a high level of interhemispheric coherence during their meditative states. This, in turn, indicates that authentic meditative states are states of unity and congruence. A fourth use of electrophysiology for meditation is the observation of elicited potentials. An evoked potential is an electrical response of the cerebral cortex to a stimulus. For example, a flash applied to a person elicits in his visual cortex a response whose morphology is specific to the given stimulus and whose duration is related to the brain process of its creation. Thus, when faced with a flash, the cortex activates a provoked potential whose main component has a latency of 50 milliseconds. This is the time necessary to create a visual image and coincides with the appearance of the image in consciousness. In the laboratory, we have taught subjects to observe their own flash-triggered potentials. The subject's task has been to become aware of their internal processes associated with the characteristics of their potentials, even before the images appear in their consciousness. In other words, the subject learns to recognize the process by which contents are created in his consciousness, stimulated by external stimuli. This helps the subject to be able to penetrate into his own processes, knowing and observing them. We have named this technique samyama in provoked potentials, in honor of the yogic technique of direct knowledge and its confluence with electrophysiology. There are great possibilities for the application of electrophysiology to self-knowledge and meditation, and what I have presented has been a small portion of all the possible ones, but I think it is enough to make you understand that science can be used for the benefit of the process of the development of consciousness. Conclusion. I have presented different meditation techniques so that the reader can get to know them and choose which one or ones she wishes to practice. I cannot affirm that the techniques presented are the only ones that exist, and I am not in a position to assure that they are superior to others that, due to lack of space or ignorance, I have not included. It is my wish that this book contributes to the purpose of helping the personal development of those who read it. I cannot conclude this writing, however, without making one last consideration. The development of consciousness is directed towards the unity of oneself, with all that this includes, and therefore acceptance is the best of techniques. When accompanied by observation, one enters into true meditation. It would seem that all spiritual traditions agree that the development of consciousness involves an expansion of consciousness. Meditation stimulates this expansion through a gradual process of disidentification with concrete contents of experience and identification with more and more general aspects until it leads to unity. In the early stages of development, there appears a self linked to the body. The identity of the self is the bodily identity. Everything that is not the body itself is experienced as belonging to an external not-self. The bodily identity emerges as a result of an arduous sensory experimentation in which different objects are tested and catalogued as belonging to something foreign when biting, sucking, or damaging them proves that they do not activate sensations comparable to those resulting from biting, sucking, or damaging body parts. Everything that belongs to the body is included within the sensation of the self, and everything that does not belong to it is part of the other. Otherness is not controlled in the same way as that which includes the self. The latter has limits defined by its surface. Bodily identity is modified with the emergence of thought and emotion, and with the appearance of adult education. Adults punish certain manifestations of bodily identity and reward others. Certain emotions are approved and others rejected. The internalization of these teachings begins to activate another level of identity, more moral than corporal. In the generality of Western men and women, identity is associated with certain values and social precepts that almost always leave out bodily components. It is only after intense work that the bodily identity is reacquired, and from there begins a process of inclusion of aspects that were previously lived outside of the self, but that little by little are lived as part of the self. The process is activated when synchronization events are experienced, in which what is perceived as external and foreign to the self begins to manifest in connection with the self. When this happens, one realizes the possibility that what is experienced as external is also part of one's own identity. The new self appears that includes the world, the body, thoughts, and emotions in a new territory in which what was previously external begins to be lived as internal. With each expansion of consciousness, a new identity appears, more and more generalized and encompassing. In this process, observation is one of the key elements. If something can be observed, who is the observer? The observer, as an ego identity that includes all that is possible to observe, emerges as a new inclusivity. The self that was previously limited by the bodily surface is now limited by the capacity of observation. This new self, much more expanded and encompassing, also, in time, becomes the content of a new identity that surpasses it. The self can no longer be restricted to the observer, for one begins to feel that the observer was only a tool for advancement, and like the organic body, a limited level of reality. What is intuited is that, beyond the observer, there is a self that does not admit separations between the observer and the observed, but transcends them, since even the experience of the observer separates. That is to say, it determines a division between the self and the not-self that is much more diffuse than before, but ultimately dualistic. Through meditation, one experiences that the image sees itself and the sound hears itself in an identity in which there is no longer an observer, since the observer and the observed end up merging. Identity at this level ceases to be personal, and the self begins to be experienced as belonging to the whole. Later, without the attempt to ingratiate individuality with unity, it disintegrates when it is discovered that beyond explanations there is that which is felt as oneself, which is experienced as belonging to the whole, but which does not support any attempt at rationalization. It simply exists, and its experience is what proves its existence. The world and the universe vibrate with consciousness, and one's self is it. This fusion is what meditation leads to. In all this path, acceptance and observation are indispensable, as I mentioned at the beginning. If the body is not accepted, it could never be included in the new level of identity, and therefore it would be incomplete. Failure to complete a level causes the experiences coming from the rejected to be externalized, thus creating an illusory division between the self and the not-self. All that is experienced is part of oneself, and since in the sameness of oneness there is neither space nor distance, the consideration that a certain experience is remote from oneself is false. The universal self could be called being. The self is found at all levels of identity, but it is correctly identified when the boundaries of separation between self and non-self are broken down. The first part of this book, dedicated to bodily exercises, was included with the purpose of recovering the bodily identity and purifying its processes as a preliminary step for the methods of observation. That is to say, the same logic of natural development was followed in which the body is first recognized as identity, and then this is expanded to everything observed. The self-practicing meditation allows this inclusion of the observer as part of the identity. All the other techniques described continue the process of inclusion of the self in ever more expanded units until unity and fusion are achieved. Whoever performs these techniques with dedication and love will grow and transform into a better human being. Ideally, he will come to recognize and live his real nature, which is the same as that of the cosmos. That the above is achieved is my best wish and the motivation on which the writing of this work was based. The end. If you liked this audiobook, share it with the people you appreciate the most. Thank you for following the channel Bending Realities. A big hug, and may the infinite wisdom of the Creator guide you always.